Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Harryverse X, presenting to you today, what if Black Widow was Harry's mother instead of Lily and Red Room trained him as assassin wizard from birth? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, Ghost Protocol. The go bag was packed before breakfast. That was the first rule Natasha had ever taught him, before languages, before lockpicking, before the 47 pressure points that could render a man unconscious in under 4 seconds. Always be ready to move. The bag lived under his bed in a flat on Waterloo Bridge, and every morning Harry checked it the same way he checked everything, quickly, thoroughly, without making it obvious he was checking it all. Today the bag was different. Today it had robes in it. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and looked at them, black wool, slightly stiff, smelling like the shop on Diagon Alley where the old witch had measured his arm span with a tape measure that moved on its own and hummed to itself. He'd clocked 3 exits in that shop, catalogued 2 other customers as non-threats, and noted that the witch's one hand trembled slightly when she reached above her head. Habit. Natasha said habits were the only thing that kept you alive when your brain was too busy to think. The robes were strange. He folded them anyway and tucked them beside the collapsible combat baton he'd hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. You're going to be the most over-prepared 11-year-old in wizarding history. Natasha was leaning in the doorway, coffee mug in both hands, watching him with that expression she had, the one that looked like nothing from the outside and meant everything if you knew how to read her. Harry had spent 11 years learning how to read her. There were still days he got it wrong. You taught me that preparation is the difference between mission success and a body bag, yeah. She came into the room and sat on the desk chair, spinning it slightly. She was wearing a gray thermal and tactical pants, hair down, which meant she didn't have an op today and wasn't expecting company. Small details. Harry tracked them automatically. I also taught you that packing a collapsible baton for a school is a tactical choice that needs justification. I can justify it. I know you can. That's not the point. She took a sip of coffee and looked at the bag with that same neutrally weighted attention she gave everything. The point is you're going into a world where the primary weapons system is a stick and intention. You need to be fluent in their language before you start importing vocabulary. Harry looked at the baton. Then he took it out of the book and set it on the bed. Natasha didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That was the other thing about her, she never celebrated small compliance the way handlers did, the way the Red Room instructors had when he was small and learning that approval was a resource to be rationed. She just moved on, because the conversation was finished and moving on was what you did. Fury sent the updated dossier, she said. Quirinus Quirrell, Defense against the Dark Arts Professor, Hogwarts. 1 year off the grid preceding his current posting. Came back different. Everyone who knows him says so. She pulled a folded paper from her waistband, actual paper, not a phone, because some information didn't belong anywhere with a battery, and set it on the desk. I don't like him. Harry picked up the paper and read it in the time it took most people to read the first line. You don't like anyone until they've earned it. And yet I somehow have a kid. She tilted her head slightly. What do you make of it? Year off the grid, Eastern Europe primarily based on the travel stamps before the gaps. Then he comes back wearing a turban and stuttering when he didn't before. Harry put the paper down. The turban is covering something. Head injury wouldn't explain the behavioral shift this completely. It's a concealment. That's my read too. She finished her coffee. You're not there to investigate him. You're there to go to school, build cover, and pay attention. If Quirrell's concealing something, it will make itself apparent. Your job is to be in a position to see it when it does. And Dumbledore? The word landed in the room differently. Harry watched her face do that thing it did when she was deciding how much to give him, a microscopic tension at the corner of her left eye, gone in half a second. Dumbledore, she said carefully, is the most powerful political and magical figure in Britain and possibly Europe. He runs a school. He maintains a carefully constructed image of benevolent eccentricity that has been in place for approximately 60 years. She paused. That's a very long time to maintain a persona. You think it's a persona? I think everything is a persona until someone proves otherwise. She stood up and took the coffee mug to the door, then stopped. He believes you're the key to ending a war that isn't over yet. He's been planning around you since before you were born. Men who plan around other people as pieces on a board. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Harry had read the Red Room files on handlers and assets. He knew what happened to assets who forgot they were people. I know, he said. I know you know. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way she did when she was letting herself do it, which wasn't often. You have green eyes, she said, which was not tactical information and not a threat assessment and was therefore, in Natasha's vocabulary, something else entirely. You've mentioned that before. Your father had them too. She left before he could answer. Harry sat with that for exactly 30 seconds. Then he zipped the go-bag closed, checked the Hogwarts letter one more time, platform 9 3/4, King's Cross Station, 11 o'clock, and went to eat breakfast. The flat was a two-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that looked like student housing and operated as something considerably more complicated. The second bedroom was Natasha's, though she slept in it less than half the time. The kitchen was stocked with the kind of food that kept well and required minimal preparation, except for Tuesday mornings when Natasha made actual pancakes for reasons she had never explained and Harry had learned not to question, because some things were simply true and needed no justification. He made himself eggs and toast. He checked the window, view of the Thames, 3 visible entry points to the building from this angle, one possible sniper position on the roof of the structure across the water that had been empty for 2 years but you checked anyway. The river was grey and the sky was that specific London white that wasn't quite clouds and wasn't quite clear, and somewhere beneath Harry's sternum there was a thing he didn't have a precise word for. Not fear. He knew fear, it was a physiological response, elevated heart rate and cortisol, useful for sharpening focus if you didn't let it become noise. This wasn't that. This was something quieter. Something that sat in the chest and hummed. He was going to school. Not a Red Room facility. Not a safe house with rotating instructors who evaluated his progress and reported to people he never met. An actual school, castle, according to the reading material, with 1,100 students and ghosts in the hallways and a sport played on broomsticks that defied 4 separate laws of physics he'd studied. The thing in his chest hummed a little louder. He ate his toast. Natasha drove him to King's Cross in a black sedan that had reinforced doors and a surprisingly good sound system. She didn't talk much during the drive, which was normal. Harry watched London go past and reviewed what he knew about Hogwarts through systematic mental indexing, layout, known staff, student body size, blood status politics, the current power structure in both the ministry and the school itself. The Wizarding World, he had concluded at age 9 after approximately 3 years of supplementary reading, was a fascinating sociological case study in institutional insularity. They had survived by hiding, and hiding required uniformity, and uniformity required the suppression of outside information. This meant they were, collectively, significantly behind on threat assessment methodology, counterintelligence basics, and organizational security. Their best defensive system was a school run by a man who had never met a situation he didn't want to control. It was, objectively, an extraordinary environment to deploy a trained operative into. Harry thought about the robes in his bag. He thought about Natasha saying your father had them too. He put both thoughts in separate boxes and focused on the approach to King's Cross. Barrier between 9 and 10, Natasha said, pulling up outside. Don't run at it like the guidebook says. Walk. Running draws attention and also looks ridiculous. I wasn't going to run at it. I know. She put the car in park and looked at the station entrance. Families go through in clusters. There'll be a few going at the same time. You can slip through in the natural flow. I know how to walk through a barrier without being seen, Natasha. You know how to walk through a barrier and be invisible. That's not the same thing this time. She turned to look at him and her expression had shifted, still controlled, still precise, but carrying something underneath that she was choosing to surface. You need to be seen, Harry. By the right people. You need to build genuine social relationships, not just cover assets. They should like you because you're likable. Do you understand the difference? He thought about it honestly. I understand it conceptually. That's the problem. She reached into the back seat and picked up a paper bag, the takeaway cup of hot chocolate she'd grabbed from the coffee shop on the Strand without him asking, without commenting on it, just knowing. She handed it to him. You're extraordinarily good at making people believe you're their friend. You're not as practiced at actually being one. Are you practiced at it? The corner of her mouth moved. A fraction. I'm working on it. She looked at the station again. Ron Weasley is in your year. Large family, no operational experience, genuine and loyal. He's not a mark, he's not a vector, and he's not a liability. He's potentially a friend. Let him be that. And Hermione Granger? Granger will figure out you're different before anyone else does. She's too observant not to. When she does, let her ask the questions. She paused. Answer some of them honestly. That was a significant tactical departure from standard cover protocol. Harry noted it. How honestly? Use your judgment. She looked at him one more time, that look again, the one that cost her something. You have good judgment. Better than I did at your age. She reached over and fixed a non-existent problem with his collar. Her hands were very steady. They always were. Go learn something. He got out of the car. He picked up his trunk, which had a false bottom and was considerably heavier than it looked, and his owl, Dova, who was a white-streaked gray bird Natasha had given him at age 8 and named in Russian, because of course she had. He walked into King's Cross and did not look back. Natasha sat in the car for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before pulling away. Harry knew this because he counted. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 was precisely what it looked like, a structural impossibility that was also a door. Harry waited in the natural flow of foot traffic, timed his approach to coincide with a family of 7 in varying shades of red hair who were managing 3 trolleys and a pair of extremely vocal twins, and passed through as part of their wake. Clean, unobtrusive, no one looked at him. Platform 9 3/4 hit him like a sensory recalibration. He'd been in the magical world before, Diagon Alley twice, a brief transit through the leaky cauldron, one memorable afternoon when Natasha had taken him to a wizarding safe house in Edinburgh to meet a contact who turned out to be a squib working as an information broker. He was not unprepared for magic. But this was different. The steam from the Scarlet engine moved wrong, curling up in patterns too deliberate to be random. The owl cages stacked on trolleys held birds that watched the crowd with an attention that reminded Harry of surveillance systems. The air tasted faintly metallic, charged, the way it smelled before lightning except constant and directionless. Every single person on this platform had something that could hurt him in their pocket. He assessed this in roughly 2 seconds and adjusted his baseline threat model accordingly. The Weasley family, it was clearly the same family, had distributed themselves across the platform in the chaotic way that large families did, which was to say without any apparent system but actually with the deep unconscious choreography of people who had moved together for years. The mother was a broad-shouldered woman with a kind face and a voice like a foghorn when she chose to use it. The twins were already gone, vanished into the crowd. A girl with the same red hair was looking anxious. A tall boy was saying goodbye. The youngest boy was standing slightly apart, watching the engine with an expression Harry catalogued as excited, nervous, putting on a performance of casual that wasn't quite landing. Ron Weasley. According to the file, which had been thin, because the Weasleys were not people anyone had been watching closely enough, youngest son, 6 older siblings, genuine and loyal, Natasha had said. Harry loaded Vdova's cage onto the train and found an empty compartment 3 cars back from the engine. Good sight lines to the corridor, second compartment from the exit, easy escape route. He put his trunk in the overhead storage and sat facing the direction of travel. He read for 11 minutes. He read the same page 17 times. He acknowledged to himself with some frustration, doing the thing in his chest again. The compartment door slid open. Ron Weasley stood there, slightly out of breath, already carrying the kind of expression that telegraphed every emotion he was feeling in real time with zero concealment. He looked at Harry. He looked at the empty compartment. He said, "Do you mind? Everywhere else is full." The everywhere else was a lie. Harry could see 3 other empty compartments from this angle. Ron had picked this one specifically, which meant he'd walked the length of the train looking for someone who seemed like a viable option for company. Harry filed this under initiative, mild social anxiety, and a fairly developed instinct for threat assessment of the social rather than tactical variety. "Go ahead," Harry said. Ron sat down across from him with the particular collapse of someone who had been carrying a weight and was relieved to set it down. "I'm Ron Weasley." He seemed to decide that was enough and then second-guessed it. The big family on the platform was mine. You probably noticed." "Hard to miss," Harry said. This was true. Harry. Just Harry. Romanov Potter. He watched Ron's face, no particular recognition, which was consistent with the understanding that the Weasleys existed outside Ministry social politics and hadn't been briefed on whatever narrative Dumbledore maintained about the boy who lived. Long story. Right. Ron looked at the window, then back. Is that an eagle owl? She's brilliant. Vdova was watching Ron with the focused intensity she gave everything, head slightly tilted. Her name's Vdova. What's that mean? Widow, Harry said. Then, because it was the true reason, my mother named her. Ron nodded with the accepting ease of someone who didn't need to interrogate every detail, which was either a social grace or an absence of curiosity. Harry was beginning to think it was the former. You going to Hogwarts first year? Yes. Me too. I'm the last one, all my brothers went. Bill and Charlie are already out, Percy's a prefect, Fred and George are third year. He paused. They're a lot. I know the feeling. Ron grinned at that, sudden and genuine, not the social performance of a grin but the real thing, which activated different facial muscles and reached the eyes differently. Harry noted the difference. He'd been trained to observe it in targets. He hadn't particularly expected to observe it here. What house do you think you'll be in? Ron asked. It was the question everyone on this train was probably asking each other, and Harry had prepared an answer, Gryffindor, to mirror expected behavior, to build credibility, to align with the house most likely to generate the kind of open-hearted loyalty useful for operational support. He had prepared the answer 3 days ago and it had been a clean, functional calculation. He said, not sure, because for some reason the prepared answer felt wrong in this specific moment, with this specific person who grinned with his whole face. I'll probably be Gryffindor, Ron said without any particular pride, just statement of fact. Everyone in my family is. So. Probably. He glanced at the window where the last of London was giving way to countryside, and something shifted in his expression, that slight flicker of being overwhelmed that Harry recognized from every new operative's first deployment. It's strange, isn't it? Going somewhere you've heard about your whole life but never actually been. Yes, Harry said, and this time he wasn't running a parallel assessment on whether the answer was strategically correct. He was just answering. It's strange. The compartment door opened again. The girl stepped in with the kind of entrance that communicated she had evaluated several compartments and selected this one based on criteria she was not going to explain. Brown hair pulled back, 2 books already under one arm, eyes that moved over the compartment in a rapid sweep that reminded Harry, disconcertingly, of his own standard entry scan. "Excuse me," she said, addressing both of them with the slightly over-crisp diction of someone who had rehearsed being confident. "Have either of you seen a toad?" "Neville, the boy from the compartment forward, has lost his." "No toad," Ron said. She looked at Harry. Not at his face, at him, at the way he was sitting, at the book on the seat beside him, at the owl, at the specific placement of his hands. Her eyes were fast and systematic, and she caught him noticing her noticing, and her chin came up fractionally. "You're reading defensive magical theory." "Apparently. That's third-year curriculum." She wasn't saying it to be impressive, she was saying it because she had encountered a data point that didn't fit her model and she was flagging it. "Your first year." "Apparently," Harry said again. She processed this for approximately 1.5 seconds and then, "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the course books, of course, and several supplementary texts." "Are you finding that one consistent with the primary theoretical framework in Wilbert Slinkard's work, or do you think Slinkard is as reductive as I do?" Ron made a very small sound that might have been strangled laughter. Harry looked at Hermione Granger, who was standing in his compartment having just asked him, an 11-year-old, for his theoretical opinion on competing magical defensive philosophy, and felt the thing in his chest shift from a hum into something that had a different quality entirely. Something that was not a threat assessment and not a tactical calculation. Something more like the functional equivalent of "oh, this is going to be interesting." "Slinkard's framework treats magic as a defensive posture," Harry said. "He assumes the practitioner is always reactive. That's a tactical limitation." Hermione's eyes widened slightly. Then she came in, sat down, and put her two books on the seat with the precise movements of someone who had just decided she was staying. "That's exactly what I thought. He never accounts for," she stopped. Collected herself. Looked at both of them. "Sorry. I'm hijacking your compartment." "It's fine," Ron said, with the easy generosity of someone who genuinely meant it. "It's fine," Harry agreed, and meant something slightly different but equally true. He learned more about them in the 4 hours to Hogsmeade than most handlers learned about assets in a month of surveillance. Ron's body language opened like a book once he'd decided someone was worth talking to. He leaned forward, gestured with his hands, dropped his performance of casual entirely and replaced it with something guileless and warm that Harry did not have a tactical category for. He talked about his brothers with an affection that had frustration woven through it, about chess, which he apparently played at a level that exceeded his years, which was interesting, and about the casual ease of coming from a family where magic was simply the texture of daily life. Hermione talked differently. She talked in the way of someone who had spent most of her life reading instead of speaking and was now releasing 11 years of accumulated information in measured bursts, each one carefully calibrated to see how her audience responded, each one a small test. Every time Harry engaged with a specific idea rather than deflecting, something in her posture softened incrementally. She was, he realized, lonely in a specific way, the way of people who were extraordinary at things that most people found alienating. She had more knowledge than friends. She was trying to determine if this compartment was a place that could change that ratio. Harry had been trained to identify loneliness as a vulnerability. He was aware that his training was telling him to file this information under tactical leverage points. He was also aware, with equal and increasing clarity, that his training could go to hell on this particular item. "You knew about magic before Hogwarts," Hermione said at some point around Birmingham. "Not a question." "Yes." She waited. He'd noticed she did this, let silences sit rather than filling them, which was a more sophisticated conversational technique than most adults managed. "My mother's world is Muggle," Harry said carefully. This was true. But she knew about magic. She made sure I was prepared. This was also true, in the same way that saying the ocean was wet was true while omitting that you were currently in the middle of it. Hermione accepted this. Ron had fallen asleep against the window by this point, which Harry found oddly disarming, the complete unconscious trust of someone who slept without a secondary awareness running. Harry did not sleep on transport. He never had. He watched the countryside go dark and reviewed his objectives. Primary, establish cover as Hogwarts student, first year, no extraordinary background. Secondary, identify and assess Quirrell. Build social foundations with Weasley and Granger as primary contact assets. He heard Natasha's voice correcting the word assets and substituted, with something like deliberate effort, people. Tertiary, begin gathering intelligence on Dumbledore's operational intentions. The train pulled into Hogsmeade Station and the platform was dark and cold and full of first years stumbling off the steps with their luggage and their owls and their faces open with that specific combination of terrified and thrilled that Harry was very carefully not allowing himself to feel in any visible way. He felt it anyway. He was getting better at noticing the difference between suppressing something and containing it. Ron woke up when the train stopped, looked briefly disoriented, and then oriented immediately to Harry and Hermione with the easy instinct of someone who had already decided they were his people. Right. We're here. We're here, Harry confirmed. The giant, and he was, objectively, extremely large, half again the height of the tallest adult Harry had seen, built like a structure rather than a person, stood at the end of the platform calling for first years in a voice that moved through the crowd the way weather moved, unstoppable and encompassing. That's Hagrid, Ron said. He's the gamekeeper. My dad knows him. He pushed into the crowd toward the massive silhouette with the comfortable confidence of someone navigating a known variable. Hermione followed. Harry followed Hermione and catalogued Hagrid as, non-hostile, high emotional investment in student welfare, loyal to Dumbledore to a degree that probably precluded independent judgment, possibly useful as a barometer of school culture. The boats on the lake were small and charmed and cold, and Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and a small, round-faced boy who turned out to be Neville Longbottom, still toadless. The toad had been found, apparently, under a seat in a compartment near the rear of the train. Neville had the particular quality of someone who had been told, either by people or by accumulated experience, that he wasn't quite enough. Harry recognized this not from personal experience but from observation. It was not a profile Natasha had ever permitted to develop in him, because competence had been the primary currency of his childhood, but he'd read enough psychology to identify it on sight. He would, he thought, be worth watching. People who were told they weren't enough occasionally became the most interesting variables in a situation. The castle appeared through the mist on the water and every child in every boat went quiet. Harry went quiet too. He had expected it to be large. He had read the dimensions, one of the most expansive magical structures in Britain, shifting internal architecture, enchanted ceilings, 7 floors plus multiple sublevel dungeons. He had the spatial parameters in his head with the clear grid of someone who memorized floor plans the way other children memorized song lyrics. He had not expected it to feel like something. It rose from the rock above the lake like it had always been there, like it was less a building than a geological feature. Towers and battlements catching the moonlight and throwing it back changed. The lake was perfectly still and the castle was perfectly reflected in it and the whole image had a quality. He searched for the word, found it in a language that wasn't English, solemn. Serious in the way that only permanent things were serious. Something in Harry Romanoff Potter's chest, the thing that had been humming since this morning, went quiet. Not suppressed. Not contained. Just, quiet. Like something recognizing something. He thought, with no tactical framework to put it in, oh. There you are. He said nothing. He looked at the castle and the castle looked back and the boats moved silently across the dark water and behind him, Neville's toad made one small sound and then was quiet too. The great hall was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. Harry had walked into the operation rooms of 3 different intelligence agencies, the Kremlin twice, and a Black Sea oligarch's yacht that had been simultaneously the most opulent and most depressing environment he'd ever assessed. None of them had prepared him for 400 lit candles floating in the air above 4 long tables and a ceiling that showed the night sky, not painted, not illusory, actually open in some metaphysical sense that bent physics in a direction he found genuinely interesting. He walked in with the other first years and kept his expression in the default setting, neutral, slightly attentive, no strong reaction visible, and tracked the room in segments. Staff table, 14 visible staff members, one seat conspicuously occupied by a man in a turban who was not looking at the entering students. Every other staff member was. Quirrell was looking at the far wall. Harry filed this as either significant social anxiety, or active avoidance of visual contact with the new arrivals for reasons unrelated to anxiety. His eyes came to Dumbledore and stayed there for exactly the professional minimum of time. Albus Dumbledore sat in the center of the staff table like a gravitational point, and he looked exactly like everything Harry had read about him and nothing like what Harry had imagined. The reading material said, extraordinarily powerful, politically influential, strategically minded, emotionally intelligent. Harry had built a mental profile from those descriptors and had arrived at something lean and calculating, cold intelligence wrapped in authority. The man at the center of the table had half-moon spectacles and a long silver beard and eyes that were an extraordinarily specific shade of blue, the blue of glaciers, or of very deep water, or of something that had been around long enough to develop its own weather patterns. He was watching the first years with an expression of genuine pleasure that was also, Harry noted, a thorough assessment. Their eyes met for a single moment. Dumbledore smiled. It was warm and it was real and it was also, Harry was absolutely certain, a test. Harry produced a small polite smile in return and looked away. He felt, with no particular drama, the specific sensation of being evaluated by someone who was very, very good at it. Good, he thought. So they'd both know where they stood. The sorting hat turned out to be literally a hat that sang, which Harry dealt with by deciding he would simply accept the magical world's relationship with objects that shouldn't be sentient and move forward. The song was more sophisticated than expected. It contained, encoded in the meter, a fairly precise description of each house's temperamental profile. Harry listened to it as a psychological taxonomy and found it more useful than most official profiling tools. The first years were called alphabetically. Harry watched each sorting, not the hat, but the face of the student, and then the table they walked to, and then the reaction of that table. Social dynamics established themselves in the first 3 seconds of any grouping. He was building maps. Potter, Romanoff Potter, Harrison. The hall made a sound. Not loud, not theatrical, a kind of collective intake that moved through the space like a wave. Harry heard it and tracked it and walked to the stool with the same even pace he'd maintained crossing the great hall, and sat down, and let the sorting hat fall over his eyes. Darkness. Then a voice, dry and ancient and considerably more alert than he'd expected, said, "Well, well. What have we here?" "I was going to ask you the same question," Harry said. He was keeping his mental architecture as neutral as possible, which was, he gathered, somewhat futile. The hat was, functionally, inside his head. Indeed. It's been a very long time since I've encountered a mind with this sort of. The hat paused. Harry had the disorienting sensation of something reading the thing he normally kept in the locked room, the architecture of training and instinct and calculation that he maintained below the social surface. Structure. You've been taught to think in operational terms. Every room is a battlefield. Every person is a variable. Another pause. You know this is true. It's not wrong, Harry said quietly. No. But it's not complete either. The hat moved through his mind the way water moves through a building, finding every crack, filling every space. You have extraordinary strategic intelligence. Gryffindor would be the expected placement, your father, of course, and there is real courage here, genuine and unperformed. But you don't lead with courage. You lead with assessment, Harry said. Exactly. Ravenclaw could house you, the mind is remarkable, the appetite for information genuine. The hat considered. But knowledge for you is a tool, not a destination. You don't love learning the way your Granger girl does. You love what knowing allows you to do. Harry said nothing. He was listening, which was something most people, he had found, underestimated as a skill. And Slytherin, ambition, cunning, the will to do what is necessary. You have all of these in abundance. More than most who sit on this stool with those qualities. The hat's voice shifted slightly. But there's something else. Something you've worked very hard not to look at. What's that? You care. The hat said it simply, with no drama. Not in spite of your training. Because of it. You care about the people you're sent to protect. You care about truth. You care, and this is the one that will surprise you most, about the right thing to do, even when the right thing is operationally inconvenient. These children tonight are going to become real to you, Harrison. Not assets. People. The ancient voice did something that might have been warmth. You're going to be very annoyed about it. Harry sat very still. The choice, in the end, is simpler than you're making it, the hat said. But then, all real choices are. Silence. Then the hat called out, loud enough for the whole hall, Gryffindor. The table on the far left exploded. The Weasley twins were on their feet before the word finished. Harry walked to the table and sat down and shook hands with people he'd just met and kept his expression at politely pleased, and under the noise of the hall he heard Ron Weasley, still waiting by the stool, say something encouraging to a terrified Neville Longbottom, and watched Neville stand up straighter. He catalogued this and then stopped cataloguing it and just watched it. When Ron was sorted, Gryffindor, which surprised exactly no one, he dropped into the seat beside Harry with a grin that was pure and uncomplicated and said, "Great, we're in the same house." Then the twins descended on him with great enthusiasm and Harry sat slightly to the left of the chaos and for the first time all day, something in him loosened exactly one notch. Hermione Granger crossed to the Gryffindor table 4 names later, and her expression when she sat down was the expression of someone who had been told they belonged somewhere and had decided to believe it. She sat across from Harry and looked at him and then looked at the enchanted ceiling. "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside," she said. "I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. What does it look like when there's a storm?" She paused. "Hadn't considered this. I don't know. I'll find out." Ron leaned forward between them. "Can we eat first and do homework after?" "It's not homework," Hermione said. "It's curiosity homework," Ron said. "That's not a thing." "It's absolutely a thing." Harry looked between them both, and the thing in his chest that had gone quiet on the lake started up again, but different now, warmer, a frequency he didn't have a name for but that didn't feel like a threat. He thought about Natasha in the car this morning. He thought about let him be that. He picked up his fork when the food appearing, just appearing, which was phenomenal, and listened to Ron argue good-naturedly about the taxonomy of intellectual curiosity and let himself, for approximately 40 minutes, not be on a mission. It turned out food tasted different when you weren't running a threat assessment at the same time. Later, late, the dormitory dark, the other boys asleep in a way that suggested they had not spent 11 years training themselves to maintain resting consciousness, Harry lay in his bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the hat's voice saying "You care." He thought about the way Hermione had asked about the storm ceiling like it was the most natural question in the world, which it was, which was exactly why she'd unsettled him. She thought the way he thought, curiosity as operational tool, except she hadn't been trained to think that way. She'd arrived there on her own. Through books and stubbornness and something that was just, apparently, who she was. He thought about Ron asleep 3 beds down with complete unconscious trust. He thought about Dumbledore's blue eyes finding his across the Great Hall. He thought about Quirrell, not looking at the new students. About a turban covering something. About a year off the grid. He thought about his mother sitting in a car for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He thought about the castle coming out of the mist on the lake, and the feeling, he would not suppress the word for it any longer, the feeling of recognition. Of belonging. Not to the institution or the politics or the invisible war being planned around him like a board game. To the place. To this cold stone and enchanted sky and these 4 tables full of children who were all, every one of them, learning to do something impossible. He turned on to his side. Through the dormitory window, the grounds were dark and the lake reflected stars. Harry Romanoff Potter, 11 years old, operative, son of the Black Widow, ghost in two worlds, closed his eyes. He did not feel afraid. He did not feel alone. He felt, and this was the most tactically inconvenient thing that had happened to him all day, more inconvenient than the sentient hat or the floating candles or the food that appeared from nowhere, he felt, quietly and entirely against his better judgment, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He kept his eyes closed. He slept. Chapter 2, Sorted, Not Sorted. The first morning at Hogwarts began at 5:43. Not because anyone woke Harry up. Not because of an alarm. Simply because 5:43 was when his body decided sleep was finished, the same way it always did, a clean transition from unconscious to fully alert, no grogginess, no intermediate state. He was awake and the room was dark and the four other boys in the dormitory were producing the various respiratory sounds of people who had no idea they were being listened to. He lay still for 60 seconds. Listened to the castle. It breathed. That was the only word for it. The stones themselves carried a low, subsonic hum that wasn't sound exactly but wasn't silence either. The wind found different angles through the towers than any building he'd slept in before. Somewhere below and distant, water moved through the plumbing in a pattern that suggested pipes much older than any plumbing had a right to be. There was a ghost in the hallway outside the dormitory. He could hear it, the specific quality of displaced air and dropped ambient temperature that moved differently than a person but wasn't nothing. By 6:15 he'd mentally mapped the dormitory, estimated the castle's basic cardinal orientation from the angle of the pre-dawn light through the window, and identified which of his four dormitory roommates would be operationally significant and which wouldn't. Neville Longbottom had woken once during the night, sat up for approximately 3 minutes with the particular stillness of someone navigating a bad dream, and then lain back down. Harry had not acknowledged this. He filed it as, relevant background, not current threat, monitor. Seamus Finnegan slept like someone falling down a hill, chaotic, enthusiastic, somehow landing fine. Dean Thomas had arranged his side of the dormitory with a precision that suggested he was either naturally organized or had been trained to be. Given that he'd arrived by Muggle methods and seemed genuinely new to the magical world, probably natural. Ron slept with one arm hanging off the side of the bed. He had done this all night. Harry had checked 3 times. By the time the other boys were beginning to stir, Harry was dressed, had reviewed the week schedule that Professor McGonagall had distributed the previous night, and had completed a modified version of his morning physical routine in the bathroom while it was empty. He'd had to skip 2 components, the space was wrong, the ceiling too low for certain movements, and substituted others. He was aware this was the first morning in 11 years he'd trained without Natasha somewhere in the building. He noticed this without assigning it weight and went down to breakfast. The Great Hall at 6:45 was a different entity than the Great Hall at 8 o'clock. A handful of older students, mostly 7th years with the specific hollow-eyed quality of people who had important examinations consuming them from the inside. 2 Ravenclaw 4th years engaged in a conversation so technical Harry could only follow parts of it. One of the Weasley twins, Fred, based on the file's notation that Fred was marginally more likely to wake early for logistical reasons as opposed to George, who was marginally more likely to wake early for social ones, eating toast and reading what appeared to be a diagram of something that was definitely not an authorized school project. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate and watched the hall and watched the staff table and watched Quirrell's empty chair. Every other staff member present was doing the comfortable automatic things that people did in spaces they inhabited regularly, reaching for the teapot without looking, marking papers while eating, talking to colleagues in the shorthand of people with years of common reference. Comfortable. Embedded. Quirrell's chair was empty and pushed in at a specific angle. Harry looked at the angle and thought about someone who came to breakfast at exactly the same time every day because irregular behavior created attention and attention was dangerous. He thought about someone who had something to hide and had therefore built a very deliberate routine. He thought about how the most controlled behavior was also the most readable, if you knew what you were looking for. He filed this and ate his eggs. McGonagall distributed schedules at 8 o'clock when the hall had properly filled. Harry reviewed his Transfiguration first, McGonagall, which he'd anticipated. She ran Gryffindor and it was efficient scheduling. Then Charms. Then a free period, then History of Magic, then Herbology. Defense against the Dark Arts was Thursday. He circled it mentally and moved on. "You're up early," said Hermione, sliding in across from him with her bag already organized and a book open before she'd even poured her orange juice. She said it not as accusation but as the kind of observation she made about everything, noted, categorized, filed. "Habit," Harry said. "Me too." She looked at the book, then at him. "I went through the Transfiguration reading last night. McGonagall's known for being exacting in practical work. The theory needs to be solid before she'll let you attempt anything. I've read the theory." She looked up. "Which edition?" "Bowden's second edition and the Marchetti supplementary text. Bowden's framework is cleaner but Marchetti accounts for the intent variable more accurately." Hermione put her book down. She picked up her orange juice and took a very deliberate sip and then said, "I haven't read Marchetti. Library will have it." "I know the library will have it, she paused, seeming to process something. "Where did you read it?" "Those aren't on the first-year list. My mother has an extensive collection." Another pause. A shorter one. "Your mother is Muggle." "She has an extensive collection," Harry said again, pleasantly, and looked at his schedule. He felt Hermione's eyes on him for approximately 4 more seconds, the focused, slightly frustrated attention of someone encountering a data set that wasn't yielding to the available analytical tools. He understood the feeling. He'd had it himself when he was 9 and Natasha had introduced him to an information broker in Edinburgh whose entire history was clean in a way that genuine histories never were. He'd eventually figured out the Edinburgh broker's actual identity through a combination of linguistic microanalysis and shoe wear patterns. He suspected Hermione would eventually figure him out through whatever the equivalent was for someone who read everything and forgot nothing. He was okay with that. He thought about answer some of them honestly and considered the specific geometry of how much honesty that represented. Ron appeared at 7:59 with his hair doing several things at once, dropped into the seat next to Harry with the energy of someone who had resolved their morning conflict with wakefulness in favor of minimum viable consciousness, poured an amount of pumpkin juice that suggested serious hydration deficiency, and said, "Is McGonagall actually as frightening as Percy says?" "Percy says she's strict and fair," Hermione said. "Percy says it like he respects it and is also slightly terrified." "Strict and fair is the best possible combination," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "You say that like you've met a lot of people who are strict." "I've met a lot of people who are fair." He paused. "The strict ones you can plan around. Consistency is useful." He meant this completely and it apparently came out strange because Ron gave him a look that was partly bemused and partly something more curious, the way Ron looked at things he found interesting rather than things he found alarming, which Harry was beginning to recognize as one of Ron's more distinctive qualities. "Right," Ron said, and picked up his toast, and left it there, which was another one. McGonagall walked into the Transfiguration classroom and transformed her desk into a pig and back again before anyone had fully sat down. The class went very quiet. Harry, already seated in the second row with clear sightlines to both the professor and the door, noted the pedagogical strategy: establish authority through demonstration rather than declaration, create immediate engagement through spectacle, calibrate the difficulty to suggest mastery but not impossibility. It was a strong opening. He filed McGonagall under, highly competent, direct, worth paying attention to. Transfiguration, said Professor McGonagall, is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone who messes around in my class will leave and not return. She looked over the class with the specific quality of someone who did not need to raise her voice to fill a room. You have been warned. They spent the first half of the class on theory. Harry already knew the theory. He took notes anyway, not because he needed them but because note-taking signaled engagement and engagement was the appropriate cover behavior for a first-year student, and also because McGonagall's framing of the theory had 3 specific points of emphasis that differed subtly from Bowden, and he wanted to trace the divergence later. The practical was a matchstick to needle. Simple, directional, object to object with no biological transformation component. McGonagall demonstrated once, clearly, and then said, "Begin." The class produced a range of results that spanned from nothing at all to Hermione Granger's matchstick going silver at both ends in approximately 40 seconds, which made McGonagall's mouth do something that was technically not a smile but was in the neighborhood. "Well done, Miss Granger." Hermione's posture didn't change but the set of her shoulders did, in the specific way of someone receiving approval they'd been working for. Harry looked at his matchstick. The principle was intention directing magical force through a vector, the wand, at a target, with sufficient visualization of the desired state that the magical field could interpolate the transformation. He'd been using magic since he was 8. Natasha had found a retired charms instructor named Yevgenia in St. Petersburg who had spent 3 years teaching Harry every spell on the 1st through 4th year Hogwarts curriculum on the grounds that a wizard assassin who couldn't charm was a wasted asset, and had then been retired again. Comfortably, voluntarily, she'd wanted to retire back to Kazan and had sent Harry a birthday card every year since, which was perhaps not standard operational protocol but was very Yevgenia. He touched his wand to the matchstick and thought about steel and precision and the specific quality of a needle's point, and the matchstick became a needle in the time it took to exhale. He put it down and opened his Transfiguration textbook to chapter 4. 30 seconds later he became aware that McGonagall had paused in her circuit of the room and was standing at his shoulder. He looked up. She looked at the needle. Then at him. Then at the chapter 4 heading. Her expression was the expression of a person doing a rapid recalibration. "How?" she said, a clipped, specific word that meant several things at once. "The theory was clear," Harry said. "The theory is clear to all of them," she said, nodding at the rest of the class, most of whom had matchsticks in various stages of reluctant silveriness. "The translation from theory to practice is where most students spend the first 3 weeks. I've had some prior instruction," Harry said. This was true, this was the cover story, this was also, he noted, with some surprise, something he said without the flat effect he usually maintained in cover conversations. Something about McGonagall's direct attention made oblique deflection feel wrong, the same way lying to someone honest made your mouth taste bad. How much prior instruction? The question was precise and professional. "Enough to have a working foundation," Harry said. "I don't want to disrupt the class pacing." McGonagall looked at him for a long, steady moment, the look of someone deciding whether they were being handled, and then deciding they weren't quite sure, and deciding to file it. "See me after class on Thursday," she said, and moved on. Across the row, Harry could feel Hermione doing her data synthesis face without looking at her. He turned to chapter 5. Charms was Flitwick, who was 3 feet tall and had an enthusiasm that hit the classroom like weather. He called roll and fell off his stack of books when he got to Harry's name, not, Harry realized, because of the hyphenated surname, but because he'd recognized something in it, and then write it himself with the agility of someone who had done this before and was mildly embarrassed each time. Sorry, Flitwick said, beaming. "Now then. First-year charms begins with the theory of wand motion, the foundational vocabulary of spellcasting, if you will." Harry already knew wand motion theory. He sat and listened anyway, because Flitwick was describing it through a musical metaphor, melody and rhythm and the relationship between them, that was a framing Harry hadn't encountered before and that connected several things he'd been treating as separate. He wrote, motion as rhythm, not direction. He underlined it. He noticed, on the other side of Hermione, a Slytherin student who had ended up in the mixed house charms class, platinum blonde hair, particular upright posture of someone who'd been told from birth how to hold himself, eyes that moved around the room with a specific kind of continuous social assessment. Not threat assessment. Status assessment. The mapping of everyone in the room in terms of where they fell relative to himself. Draco Malfoy. The file had been thicker than the Weasley file. Their eyes met across Hermione's shoulder for 1 second. Draco Malfoy's expression did something swift and complicated, recognition, then reassessment, then something that wasn't quite hostility but was its more interesting cousin. He'd clearly expected something specific from Harry Potter and was getting something different, and the difference was making him recalibrate. Harry looked away first, not from deference but because he'd seen what he needed to see. Malfoy spent the rest of Charms glancing at him in the way of someone who had encountered a puzzle they weren't supposed to find puzzling. Good, Harry thought. Let him think. History of Magic was Professor Binns, who was a ghost, who lectured in a monotone, who had apparently not registered that his students were not the students of 1926. Harry used the hour to review his Quirrell notes and draft a preliminary behavioral profile in a shorthand that would look like Goblin Wars notes to anyone reading over his shoulder. Subject, QQ, Avoidance Behavior Re, New Arrivals, contraindicated by professional role, Data teacher should be assessing students. Suggests subject prioritizes concealment of something over professional performance. Possible shame response, or deliberate profile management. Turban, large, always present, noted by multiple students. Head injury would be single event, persistent head covering suggests ongoing concealment. Eastern European travel preceding current posting, cross-ref with known dark artifact locations. Recommend, direct observation in subject's professional context. Thursday. He put the quill down and listened to Binns for the last 10 minutes, and discovered that under the monotone was actually a fairly rigorous account of the Goblin Rebellion of 1612 that had 3 points of connection to current ministry political dynamics if you knew where to look. He wrote those down too, in a different margin. Herbology was greenhouses and Professor Sprout and the particular sensory experience of a building full of plants that had opinions. It was good. It was physical and immediate and it required attention in a different register than the morning had, not strategic but tactile, the feeling of soil and the specific resistance of a pot-bound root system. Harry found, unexpectedly, that he didn't mind it. Ron had a natural, confident ease with herbology that he clearly hadn't anticipated in himself. He handled the plants without the nervous overcarefulness of some students and without Hermione's precise deliberateness, just a comfortable intuition that suggested someone who'd grown up with a garden that did interesting things. Your family has a garden? Harry asked, repotting a particularly opinionated mandrake-adjacent seedling. Mum's been growing things my whole life, Ron said, wrestling with a stubborn root. Gnome-infested, half of it, but yeah. You learn which plants want to be left alone and which ones want attention. Same principle, probably, with people. Ron laughed, sudden and genuine. Yeah, actually. Exactly the same. He freed the root. You're strange, you know that. I've been told. Harry pulled his seedling straight. Is that a problem? No. Ron said it simply and immediately, the way he said everything true. Just a thing I noticed. Harry looked at the seedling. It had settled into its new pot with something very like relief. Noted, he said, and felt the corner of his mouth do something that, in Natasha's facial expression taxonomy, qualified as a smile. Thursday. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled of garlic before they reached the door. A specific, high-concentration garlic smell that was either a pest deterrent or an extremely niche culinary choice or something else entirely. Harry walked in and took the third seat from the left in the second row and watched Quirrell write their names in the roll with a quill that shook. The turban was forest green today. Yesterday it had been burgundy. The size was consistent, always the same volume of fabric, always arranged with the same care. Not decorative. Functional. Whatever was beneath it was always the same size. Welcome, Quirrell said, to Defense Against the Dark Arts. This subject covers the theory and practical application of defensive and magical techniques, spells, creatures, and sea-counter curses. He smiled, and the smile was the smile of a man performing comfort at a level of technical proficiency that would fool most people. I hope, he said, in a way that suggested he hoped nothing of the kind, to make this a most interesting year. The class was introductory, theory of defensive principles, classification of threats, the standard curriculum beginning. Harry listened to everything, said nothing, and watched Quirrell teach. Not the content. The teacher. Quirrell stuttered consistently on initial consonants but not on embedded ones. Stuttering patterns were either neurological, psychogenic, or performed. A psychogenic stutter triggered by anxiety typically intensified in proportion to specific stress stimuli. You could map what someone was afraid of by watching when the stutter got worse. A performed stutter would have internal inconsistencies, rehearsed patterns versus unrehearsed responses. Harry waited for an unrehearsed moment. It came when Neville knocked a textbook off his desk in the middle row, startling Quirrell mid-sentence. For approximately 2 seconds, the stutter disappeared entirely, replaced by a flash of something fast and cold behind Quirrell's eyes that resolved back into the anxious professor performance so quickly that anyone not specifically watching for it would have missed it completely. Harry had been specifically watching for it. He wrote in his margin, pattern inconsistent. Not neurological. Performance quality suggests extended practice, at least several months. The fear is real but the expression of it is managed. He also wrote, what does he need everyone to think he's afraid of? This was a better question than what is he actually afraid of? Because the answer to the second question, Harry was increasingly certain, was nothing in this classroom. After class, in the corridor, Ron was processing his notes with the faint dazed look of someone who had expected more interesting content and received more homework than anticipated. Hermione was already cross-referencing 2 different texts. Harry walked between them and said nothing about Quirrell, because Natasha had been very clear, observe first. Share second. Selectively. He's quite nervous for a defense teacher, Hermione said, not looking up. You'd think he'd be more confident, Ron agreed. Like, that's his subject. Some people are anxious about performance regardless of competence, Harry said. This was true of Quirrell's performance, at least. He said nothing about what was underneath the performance. "Do you reckon the garlic is for something magical?" Ron asked. "Or is it just weird?" "Garlic has documented repellent properties against certain dark creatures," Hermione said. "But not in those concentrations. It would need to be very specifically prepared." She glanced at Harry. "Unless he's warding against something specific." "Or warding himself against something specific," Harry said. They both looked at him. "Like what?" Hermione asked. "Not sure yet," Harry said, and turned the corner toward the library. He felt them exchange a glance behind him. He also felt, with a certainty that had nothing to do with magical ability, that Hermione was writing a note about this in her mental file on Harrison Romanoff Potter. He was fine with that. She'd get there eventually, and when she did, she'd have earned the information. The owl arrived on Saturday morning with a folded note and no return identifier. The handwriting was in Cyrillic. In the great hall, surrounded by several hundred students receiving their post, Harry unfolded it beneath the table and read. "I hear the defense teacher is interesting. Note what he avoids looking at. Not what he looks at." And he folded it and burned it, a simple charm, wordless, that turned the paper to ash in his palm that he dusted under the table. Vdova, who had delivered it with the particular professional pride of an owl who understood discretion, ruffled her feathers and accepted a piece of his bacon. "Letter from home?" Ron asked. "From my mother." "What does she say?" Harry looked at the patch of ash under the table. "She says the defense teacher is interesting." Ron looked at the staff table where Quirrell was carefully not eating his breakfast, attending to his plate with the focus of a man who needed his hands and his eyes to be demonstrably occupied. "She doesn't even know him." "No," Harry said. "She's good at reading things from a distance." This was also true. The first flying lesson was a Tuesday afternoon in the second week, Madam Hooch on the training pitch with 20 first-years and 20 broomsticks that had seen better decades. Harry had read about broomstick flight, the physics of it, the basic control mechanics, the specific way magical levitation interfaced with forward momentum. He had not been on a broomstick before, because Natasha had decided it was a variable best introduced in the school environment. She had a sound strategic reasoning for this. He'd agreed with it at the time. Standing on the pitch with a battered school broom between them and the October sky above looking very open and very wide, he was having a moment of mild reassessment. "Up," he said. His broom came up cleanly. He glanced sideways. Ron's was up. Hermione's was reluctant. Several students were on the ground. Neville's had launched him sideways before Madame Hooch shouted, "Mount your brooms." And Harry filed this as, Neville Longbottom's relationship with his own magic was complicated, but the magic was there and it was strong and it was going to become interesting. Neville had a remembrall. He was also going to lose it, Harry noted, watching Malfoy's calculation from 40 feet away. He was right. Malfoy grabbed it when Neville's broom threw him and took it up into the air, and the performance of the thing, the drawling invitation, the casual cruelty dressed as amusement, was so precisely calibrated to its intended audience of one nervous, self-doubting Gryffindor that it made Harry feel something that wasn't quite anger but was adjacent. "Give it back, Malfoy," he said. The sky went briefly quiet. Madame Hooch had gone to take Neville to the hospital wing and the pitch belonged to the students and Harry's voice had been perfectly even and not particularly loud, but it carried the specific quality of someone who was not making a request. Malfoy turned. He was 20 feet up on a good broomstick and he looked down at Harry on the ground with the expression of someone who had expected this to be simple. Something in Harry's expression informed him that it wasn't. "Romanoff Potter," Malfoy said, rolling the name like a problem to be solved. "What are you going to do about it from down there?" Harry looked up at him. Looked at the remembrall. Looked back at Malfoy. Then he kicked off from the ground. The broom responded to him like a thing that had been waiting. That was the only description, like the matching of a key to a lock, immediate and complete, the flight translating through the handle into his hands and his hands responding without having to think about the mechanics of it because the mechanics were suddenly just part of him. He went from the ground to Malfoy's altitude in approximately 4 seconds and leveled out 6 feet away and the wind was sharp and the sky was everywhere. Something in his chest did the thing again, except from up here it felt like the sky itself was breathing, vast and clean and clear. He filed the sensation under, relevant, personal, do not examine during active situation. "The remembrall," he said. Malfoy looked at him, really looked, the way he'd been trying to look since that first glance in Charms, trying to map what he was dealing with. This close, Harry could see the effort. He could also see what was underneath it, not malice, not exactly. Something more like, "You're not supposed to be like this and I need to understand why." "I could throw it," Malfoy said. "You'd have to choose, come after me or catch it." "You'd throw it in that direction," Harry said, chin pointing slightly left without looking away from Malfoy's face, "because the wind's coming from the northeast and your right hand is your wand hand which means it's your throw hand and you'd use it. And I could catch it at that angle at this altitude in about 2 seconds. So." He held out his hand. "The remembrall." A beat. 2 beats. Malfoy dropped it, straight down, not a throw, not a pass, a test. Harry dropped 40 feet in less than 2 seconds, caught it with his left hand 3 feet off the ground, pulled up smooth, and landed without a sound. He turned around. Behind him, from the direction of the Gryffindor students watching at the edge of the pitch, there was a silence that then became a noise that was about equally composed of "brilliant" and "oh no." From above, Malfoy was watching him. The expression on his face had moved past the social performance and become something raw and genuine, not anger, not wounded pride. Fascination. Harry looked up at him for one moment, then walked back across the pitch, held out the remembrall to Neville who had apparently returned from the hospital wing in time to witness everything, and said, "Yours, I think." Neville took it. His hand was shaking slightly. "You didn't have to, it was the straightforward choice," Harry said, which was true, and also, nice flying once you got going. Neville blinked. I crashed. You controlled the landing, Harry said. That's not nothing. He walked away before Neville had to respond, because making it into a longer interaction would make it a bigger deal than it needed to be, and also because he needed a moment with his own face because the flying, the actual experience of the broomstick responding to him, the way the sky had felt, was doing something to his operational composure that required a moment of private management. Behind him, Ron said to Hermione, barely quietly enough, "Did he just—" "Yes," Hermione said. "How did he know which direction Malfoy would, wind direction and handedness," Hermione said, and then, after a pause, "I should have thought of that." "You're not terrifying," Ron said, like this was a compliment. "Neither is he," Hermione said slowly. "That's the strange thing. He's not trying to be. He just is." Harry heard this. He put it in the box he'd been building, the box that contained Ron sleeping with his arm off the bed, Hermione's storm-sealing question, Neville standing straighter, the castle coming out of the mist. The box that he hadn't labeled yet because labeling required a category and he didn't have one. He thought he was beginning to understand what the category might be. He thought about this for exactly as long as it took to walk from the pitch to the castle entrance, and then he put it away and went to do his potions homework. McGonagall after Transfiguration on Thursday was as direct as everything else about her. "Sit," she said, when the last of the class had filed out. She sat across from him at the nearest desk rather than behind her own, which he noted as, she wanted a pure conversation, not a hierarchical one. She respected him enough to make it level. He adjusted accordingly. "Your Transfiguration work is considerably above the first-year standard," she said. "As is your charms work, which Phileas has mentioned. And from what Professor Quirrell has noted, your theoretical understanding of defensive magic is advanced." A pause. How advanced? Harry considered. He thought about Natasha's use your judgment and thought about McGonagall's face, the strict and fair combination, no performance, no agenda that he could detect, and made a choice. "I've completed what I understand to be the equivalent of approximately 4 years of theoretical work and 2 years of practical." McGonagall's expression did not change outwardly. Her eyes, however, did the thing that very controlled people's eyes did when they were processing something significant. "That is considerably more than some prior instruction." "I thought some prior instruction was accurate in spirit if not in scope." The corner of her mouth moved. "You have a gift for technically accurate statements. I've been told." She leaned back slightly. "And practically? You've been flying," Madame Hooch had some observations. "And your practical transfiguration is," she stopped, seemed to decide something. "Do you know what you'd like to do with this education, Mr. Romanoff Potter? What you hope to get from Hogwarts specifically?" The question landed in an interesting way. He had a prepared answer to this question: Dumbledore's orbit, intelligence gathering, the slow accumulation of position and access. He had that answer ready and neat and it was not the answer he gave. "I want to understand what I can do," he said instead. "Not as capacity. I know most of my capacity. I want to understand what magic is. What it actually is." He paused. "My education has been thorough on what magic does. Nobody's been very specific about what it is." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the right question." He looked at her. "What's the answer?" "I'll let you know when I find out," she said dryly, which was so human and so unexpected that he felt something warm move through him unexpectedly. "In the meantime, I'll arrange for you to access 4th-year supplementary material from the library under my sign-off. You'll attend standard classes but I expect you to be working beyond the standard curriculum on your own time. We'll check in monthly." She paused. "And I expect your work to remain calibrated to your year group in terms of visible output. I won't have your classmates feeling outpaced before they've found their footing." "I understand," Harry said. And then, because it was true, "I appreciate the consideration for them." McGonagall gave him a look that was partly evaluative and partly something warmer. "You're a peculiar child," she said. "I don't mean that unkindly." "I know," Harry said. "I've been called strange twice this week already. And I think I might be starting to see it as a feature," he said. McGonagall's mouth did the thing again. "Dismissed, Mr. Romanoff Potter." He picked up his bag and walked to the door and she said, without looking up from her desk, "Good flying on Tuesday." "I've had worse than wind from the northeast," he said. "I don't doubt it," she said, and he heard in her voice the specific quality of someone deciding to ask a question later, when they had more information to bring to it. He went to the library. He pulled out his Quirrell notes and his behavioral profile and began drafting the second layer of observation points. The pattern was becoming more visible. The shape of the thing under the turban was not yet clear, but its edges were sharpening. Outside the library window, the grounds were going gold with early October, and the lake reflected the sky the way it always did, perfectly and completely, like the water had made a decision to hold the world above it exactly as it was. He wrote, "Thursday observation, subject avoids eye contact with specific students, not all. Pattern requires mapping. Why some and not others?" He circled the word why. He was going to need to be closer to Quirrell to answer it. Not dangerously close. Just close enough. He had a method for that. He had a method for most things. What he was still working on, he thought, pulling out a fresh piece of parchment to write a letter in Cyrillic that would arrive at a flat on Waterloo Bridge by Saturday morning at the latest, was the method for everything else. For the things that didn't have methods. For the storm ceiling and the sleeping arm and the way the castle breathed at 6 in the morning like it was glad you were there. He wrote, "Quirrell progress as noted. Malfoy, interesting rather than dangerous, reassess long-term. McGonagall, trustworthy, most trustworthy adult in building, preliminary assessment. Dumbledore, insufficient data, active caution maintained." Then he wrote, beneath the tactical summary, in the margin, in English instead of Russian, in handwriting smaller than everything else, "Flying is extraordinary. Thought you should know." He sent it with Dova just before dinner, and when the owl tilted her grey-streaked wings and disappeared into the evening sky, he stood at the Ollery window for longer than was strictly necessary, watching her go. Chapter 3, The Architecture of Loyalty. The castle had a specific quality at 2 in the morning that it didn't have at any other time. Harry had been awake for 40 minutes, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that this time it wasn't training instinct or threat response that had pulled him from sleep. It was sound, a low, rhythmic thumping from somewhere in the castle that didn't match any of the building's standard nocturnal vocabulary. Not plumbing. Not ghosts, who moved with the particular displaced air quality he'd catalogued in the first week. Not Peeves, who was loud in a way that had personality. This was something larger. Something physical. Something on a lower floor. He was out of bed and dressed in 90 seconds. He paused at the dormitory door and looked back at Ron, who was asleep with the arm again, and at the other beds, all undisturbed, all producing the passive breathing of the deeply unconscious. He thought about going alone. He thought about every instinct that said solo operations were cleaner, faster, lower risk in terms of variables introduced by additional personnel. He went alone. The fat lady's portrait swung shut behind him and the corridor was dark except for the ambient moonlight through the high windows, and Harry moved through it the way he moved through all unfamiliar environments at night, close to the walls, weight on the balls of his feet, sound reduced to a level that put him below most people's threshold of awareness. Not invisible. Just quiet. There was a difference. Quiet was a choice, invisible required either a cloak or very specific architectural knowledge. He was developing the architectural knowledge. Third floor, the thumping suggested. Third floor, something rhythmic, and now a smell that hadn't been here yesterday, earthy, animal, large animal, a specific biological signature that connected in his memory to a wildlife conservation brief he'd read at age 9 when Natasha had decided his operational reading list needed broader coverage. He stopped outside the door on the third-floor corridor. It was slightly ajar. He looked at the lock, picked, recently, with something thin and not particularly careful. Not a student, probably. Students would either know the shortcut or do it messily. This was done quickly and functionally, the way someone did a lock they didn't care about afterward. He pushed the door open 2 inches and looked through. The room was a large empty classroom. In the middle of it was a dog. Except calling it a dog was the way that calling the English Channel a puddle was technically accurate. It was 3 times the size of any dog he'd ever seen, which was already considerable given that Natasha kept a detailed reference for all large-breed working dogs as part of operational animal awareness. It had 3 heads. Each head had an own separate operational awareness, 2 were tracking something on the far side of the room and 1 had already turned to face the door. Harry went very still. The head watching him was the leftmost one. It was making a sound in its chest that wasn't a growl yet. A pre-growl. The decision-making stage. Harry did not move. He did not close the door, closing the door would require movement. He held eye contact with the head, which was a debated strategy with most large dogs but which he'd found consistently effective, not dominant eye contact, which aggressed, but present eye contact, which said I see you rather than I challenge you. The head watched him for 7 seconds. Then it lost interest and turned back to the far side of the room where the other 2 heads were still tracking something, presumably their primary stimulus. Harry let out a breath so slowly it didn't qualify as exhaling. He backed out of the doorway and eased the door closed. He stood in the corridor for a moment and thought about this. A 3-headed dog, Cerberus variant, he thought, Greek magical creature, used historically as a guardian. In a disused classroom on the 3rd floor. That Filch had specifically been patrolling for weeks, that students had been warned away from, that something was being guarded. He thought about Quirrell and the Eastern European travel and the behavioral concealment profile. He thought about the Gringotts break-in that had been mentioned in passing in the Daily Prophet 2 weeks ago, a vault, reportedly emptied the same day a large withdrawal had been made. Something moved and something came here. He stood in the corridor and let the shape of it come together. Something was being hidden at Hogwarts. Hidden behind a 3-headed dog on the 3rd floor. And at least one person in this building knew what it was and had come here tonight to look at it, or verify it, or interact with it, which was why the dog's attention had been on the far side of the room. He started walking back toward Gryffindor Tower. He was halfway there when he heard voices. He stopped in an alcove behind a suit of armor and went completely still. 2 figures, one at each end of a short connecting corridor. One wore a turban. The other wore teacher's robes but no identifying features, the hood was up. Their voices were low and Harry caught fragments, something about the corridor, something that sounded like when the time is right, and from Quirrell, barely audible, a tone that was not the performed anxiety of the classroom but was raw and something Harry hadn't heard in Quirrell's voice before. Fear. Actual fear. The real kind. The hooded figure moved away. Quirrell stood alone for a moment and then walked in the opposite direction. Neither of them had looked at the alcove. Harry remained completely motionless until both sets of footsteps had been gone for 90 seconds, and then he moved. He thought about the hooded figure's walk. The gait, the height, the specific way the robes moved. He was filing it, but he knew already, not enough data. A back view in a dark corridor was insufficient for identification. He thought about Quirrell's actual fear and what it meant that the performed fear he showed in daylight was so different from this. He thought about the thing in the room on the 3rd floor and what it was guarding. He went back to the dormitory and sat on the edge of his bed and wrote 3 pages of compact observations in cipher and then sat in the dark for a while, thinking. He thought, there are at least 2 players in this, not 1. Quirrell is not the architect. He thought, something very significant is hidden in this building. He thought, Dumbledore put it here. And then, because it was 2:45 in the morning and his mind was doing the thing where the operational tracks and the other tracks ran alongside each other and occasionally intersected, he thought about the hooded figure's fear and how different real fear was from performed fear and how you could only tell the difference if you'd seen both up close. And he thought about whether Quirrell was afraid of what was guarding the thing or afraid of whoever had sent him to look at it. He decided it was probably both. He lay down and was asleep in 4 minutes. The next evening, Hermione came to find him in the library. She sat down across from him with 3 books and the expression of someone who had been constructing an argument and was ready to present it. Harry put his quill down and gave her his full attention, which he'd noticed she responded to well, not the performance of attention but the actual thing, because she was precise enough to tell the difference. "You went somewhere last night," she said. He looked at her. "The dormitory is 4 floors up from the library. I came down for a book at 2 in the morning, I couldn't sleep, and you weren't in your bed. I saw your bed. Empty." She said this without apology and without social performance. "Just, data. You were gone for approximately 40 minutes based on when I went back up." He should have known. Of course she'd been in the library at 2 in the morning. "Something woke me up," he said. "I went to investigate." "What did you find?" He considered. He thought about answer some of them honestly and thought about the architecture of what he currently knew and what Hermione specifically might contribute to it. She was the best researcher in the school by a significant margin, already, and her access to the library's cross-referencing capacity was considerable. "Something that's being used as a guard dog," he said. "On the 3rd floor." He watched her eyes widen and then focus. "And a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear." "Between who?" "Quirrell and someone I didn't identify." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Around them, the library was nearly empty, a pair of 6th years, Madame Pants at her desk, and the specific hushed air of a room that considered itself important. "You think there's something there," she said. "Something significant. Something being hidden." "I think there's something significant being hidden at Hogwarts, yes. I think it's connected to Quirrell, and I think the garlic and the stuttering and all of it is performance managing how much people look at him." He paused. "And I think whatever is actually going on is bigger than one nervous defense teacher." Hermione was already reaching for one of the books she'd brought. "I've been doing some reading," she said, and Harry felt a pulse of something that was very close to respect. "After what you said last week about warding himself against something specific. I looked up magical concealment methods and guardian creatures and," she opened the book to a flagged page. "There was a robbery at Gringotts in July. The account the robbers targeted was emptied the same day, by Dumbledore's agent. Which means whatever was in that vault is now somewhere else. And Gringotts published a statement calling it the most secure bank in the world and nothing of value was in the targeted vault. Which means it was either lying or the thing of value was already gone," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at him. "I know how to find out more, if you know what we're looking for." "What do you need?" "Access to the restricted section. Or someone with plausible reason to be in it." She paused. "McGonagall signed off on your advanced material access. That might cover adjacent restricted texts if the framing is right." Harry thought about this. He thought about McGonagall, trustworthy, direct, unlikely to be used as a research vector without at least knowing she was contributing to something. He decided against it. "Different approach," he said. "What do we know about what Gringotts would store that also needs magical guarding above the standard vault level?" "Artifacts. Objects of significant magical power or significant risk." Hermione opened her notebook. She had a notebook, an actual organized notebook with section dividers, which was so perfectly Hermione that he felt something warm and amused at the same time. "Dumbledore has a documented history with a particular alchemist, Nicholas Flamel, who is known to have created one object of significant power. I haven't been able to confirm what it is yet." "Nicholas Flamel," Harry said. He thought for 3 seconds. "Known for extended life. Extraordinarily old. Created something that, alchemy. Transformation. The Philosopher's Stone." Hermione's pen stopped. That's a legend. So are three-headed dogs, Harry said. She looked at him for a beat. Then she wrote Philosopher's Stone in her notebook with 2 underlines and drew a circle around it. I'll start there. Let me know what you find. He picked up his quill. And Hermione. She looked up. Good call, coming to find me. She made a small sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite dismissal, the sound of someone receiving a compliment they didn't know how to file, and bent back over her notebook. Harry returned to his own work. Across the table, the scratch of Hermione's pen was steady and focused, and he found, unexpectedly, that it made the room easier to be in rather than harder. He added this information to the box without labeling it and kept writing. October moved fast. The castle found its rhythm and Harry found his within it, classes in the morning, afternoons split between independent study and what he was carefully not calling surveillance but which functionally was surveillance, evenings in the common room where the social architecture of Gryffindor was becoming more legible by the week. He played chess with Ron on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Ron was very good at chess, not in the calculating, systematic way of someone who had studied openings and endgames, but in the intuitive, adaptive way of someone whose mind worked three-dimensionally in real time. He played like he breathed, like the board was an extension of a social intelligence he applied everywhere and the pieces were just people in a context he understood. Harry won the first game. The second was a draw. The third game Ron won in 22 moves and looked genuinely surprised about it. You let me win, Ron said, studying the board. No. Harry looked at the board too. You found a line I hadn't seen. Queen's sacrifice on the 17th move, I was tracking the knight. Ron frowned at the 17th position. That was just. I don't know why I did that. Pattern recognition without explicit analysis, Harry said. Your brain saw the shape of it before you consciously knew you were seeing it. He paused. That's a significant tactical ability. Ron looked at him. It's chess. Chess is a tactical environment. Right. Ron tilted his head. Is everything a tactical environment to you? Harry considered the question honestly. Mostly, he said. I'm working on it. Working on what? Not having it be everything. Ron considered this with the easy, non-judgmental attention that was so consistently Ron that Harry had started to think of it as a fixed variable, the one thing in the social environment that could be counted on to behave the same way regardless of circumstances. You can just be somewhere sometimes, you know. Not work anything. I'm aware that's theoretically possible. Want to just play again without thinking about tactics? Harry looked at the board. I don't know if that's something I can do. Try, Ron said, resetting the pieces. He tried. He lost in 14 moves and something in him, in the losing, felt unexpectedly light. He didn't examine this too carefully. He asked for a rematch. The 31st of October arrived with Hagrid's pumpkins and candles in every corridor and the great hall decorated in a way that transformed the space into something mythological. Halloween at Hogwarts was, Harry had to concede, considerably more atmospheric than Halloween at any safe house address he'd been resident at, which had mostly involved Natasha giving out operational data to S.H.I.E.L.D. agents while he monitored the building perimeter and occasionally got chocolate from the neighbors. The feast was the kind of food that appeared in the gap between memory and desire, everything both familiar and slightly better than the real version of the thing. Harry ate and watched the hall and let himself simply be in it for the duration, the way Ron had suggested, not analyzing, just receiving. It lasted about 20 minutes before he noticed Hermione wasn't there. She'd been at the Gryffindor table at the start of the feast. He'd clocked her, 3 seats down, already deep in conversation with a girl from the 3rd year about something academic. He'd tracked her peripherally the way he tracked everything, and then he'd actually tried to stop tracking things and just eat pumpkin pie, and somewhere in that 20-minute window, Hermione had gone. He looked at her seat. Empty. He looked at the other first-year Gryffindor girls. One of them, Parvati, had a slightly guilty look that she was covering badly. He'd heard, in fragments, that there had been an incident in Charms today involving Hermione correcting a classmate's wand angle in a way that the classmate had found insufferable and Ron had found equally insufferable and had said so in a way that Hermione had clearly overheard. He looked at Ron, who was eating treacle tart and looked slightly less comfortable than usual. "Where's Hermione?" Harry said. Ron's jaw stopped. "I don't know." Harry looked at him steadily. "She might be in the bathroom," Ron said. "She's been gone at least 20 minutes. Ron put down his fork. He looked at the table and something moved through his expression, the specific movement of someone who knew they'd done something and was in the middle of deciding how to own it. "I said something. In Charms. About her, you know. Being, what did you say?" Ron told him. It wasn't cruel, exactly, as insults went, it was the frustrated snapping of someone who'd been shown up and reacted badly. But it was specific. It named the very thing about Hermione that made her most vulnerable in the social environment of a school where knowing more than everyone else was only valued in specific contexts. Harry looked at Ron for a moment. He said, simply, "She heard you." "I know," Ron said. "She's probably in the bathroom on the second floor," Harry said. "That's the one she uses when she doesn't want to be found because it's the least trafficked one she knows about." He'd mapped the bathroom traffic patterns without deciding to, because he mapped everything, because he paid attention, because Hermione moved through this castle in patterns that had become familiar to him in the way that operational patterns became familiar, known, tracked, significant. He was standing up. "She won't want company," Ron said, not as an argument, as a fact. "She'll want to be left alone," Harry agreed. "That's different." He pushed back from the table. "She doesn't have to talk to me. She can stay in the bathroom. But someone should know where she is." He was halfway to the door when the screaming started. Not a student-level scream, a voice amplified by the stone architecture of the castle and carrying a single word that the acoustics shredded into something barely recognizable: troll. The hall fractured instantly into the specific chaos of a large group receiving threat information without operational framework. Dumbledore was on his feet and his voice cut through the noise the way authority does when it's completely real, instantaneous compliance, not because of the words but because of the weight behind them. "Prefects will escort students to dormitories immediately. Remain calm." Teachers were moving. Harry tracked them, McGonagall toward the upper floors, Snape in a direction that was notably different from everyone else's, going lower rather than higher, and among them, Quirrell, whose face had done something when the word troll was announced that had no performance in it at all. Calculation. Not fear. Calculation. Harry filed this at speed and moved against the student flow. Ron appeared at his shoulder. "The bathroom," Ron said. He wasn't asking. He'd already decided. They ran. Gryffindors going the other way streamed past them and Percy shouted something about them being idiots, which was not inaccurate from a conventional risk assessment standpoint, and Harry ignored it because conventional risk assessment was not the operative framework right now. The second-floor bathroom was ahead and the smell reached them first, the specific biological signature of something large and not human, earthy and animal and thick in the cold corridor air. Harry stopped Ron with one hand on his arm. He took in the scene through the bathroom door in 2 seconds. The troll was 12 feet tall, which was technically bigger than the reference text had suggested, either individual variation or outdated data. It had a wooden club the size of a small tree. It was moving through the bathroom stalls with the purposeful destruction of something that wasn't attacking anything specific yet but would if presented with stimulus. Hermione was backed against the far wall next to the sinks. She was not, Harry noted in a half-second of full assessment, incapacitated by fear. Her wand was out and her chin was up and her jaw was set, but she hadn't fired anything, which meant she'd already calculated that she didn't have the knowledge base to take it down alone and was waiting either for rescue or for a clear opportunity that hadn't appeared yet. Good judgment, Harry thought. He spoke to Ron without looking at him. Get its attention from the door. Loud as possible. When it turns, go left, not right, right's the club side. He looked at Ron for one moment. Don't do anything brave and stupid without telling me first. Define brave and stupid, Ron said. Anything where you could get hit. He was already in the bathroom. He moved along the right wall, keeping the trolls back to him, using the bank of sinks as cover. Not much cover, the troll was tall enough to see over them, but sight lines worked in angles and angles he could manage. The troll's awareness was focused forward and Harry's footsteps were below its hearing threshold in any case. Hey! Ron, from the door, with the specific volume of someone who had decided to be useful and was committing fully. Over here, stupid. The troll turned. Harry moved. He was across the bathroom in 4 seconds, positioned between Hermione and the troll's primary attack vector, and he said to Hermione without lowering his voice, "The chandelier hook, can you levitate it?" She looked up. Iron chandelier, large, hanging directly over the troll's current position. She looked at Harry. Wingardium Leviosa, she said, wand motion, precise, exactly right. He watched the chandelier shudder. Is not going to drop something that heavy, the charm isn't strong enough. You're not dropping it, Harry said, watching the troll turn back toward their side of the room, Ron's distraction having run its useful life. You're swinging it. Hermione looked at the chandelier. Her eyes did the thing they did when she was recalculating at speed. Sideways momentum, she said. Sideways momentum, Harry confirmed. On my mark. Ron. Louder, toward the door, fall back. Ron fell back into the corridor. The troll moved forward, both of its enormous feet now under the chandelier. Now, Harry said. Hermione's spell hit the chandelier with a force that was more than Wingardium Leviosa should have produced in a first year, and Harry catalogued this information for later. Her magic exceeds standard output when the application is precise and motivated, and the chandelier swung in a wide, heavy arc and came back and hit the troll across the side of its head with a sound that was somewhere between a gong and a boulder striking stone. The troll fell. Not dead, unconscious, breathing, 12 feet of it spread across the bathroom floor. The club rolled under the sinks. The chandelier swung back empty. Silence. Harry turned around. Hermione was still in casting position, wand hand extended, breathing hard, not from effort but from the specific adrenaline pattern of immediate threat resolution. Her eyes came to Harry and they were very bright, and she was deciding what to do with her face. Sideways momentum, she said again, almost to herself. I wouldn't have thought of that you thought of it in about 3 seconds when I pointed at it, Harry said. That's the relevant part. Her expression did something complicated. She lowered her wand. The door burst open. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived in that order, and the scene they encountered, 12 feet of unconscious troll, 2 first-year Gryffindors upright and functional, significant chandelier displacement, produced 3 very different reactions. McGonagall went pale, then color came back very fast. What, how, Hermione got the chandelier, Harry said. Pendulum swing, the troll was underneath it. McGonagall looked at Hermione. Then at the chandelier. Then at the troll. The calculation happening behind her eyes was visible. Mr. Weasley was at the door, Harry continued. He drew its attention while Hermione got position. McGonagall looked at him with the expression she'd been developing, the one that contained approximately equal parts assessment and something more personal. Mr. Romanoff Potter, I want a full account from you in my office tomorrow morning. It wasn't a reprimand and it wasn't a commendation. It was a statement of serious attention. Yes, Professor, Harry said. He looked at Quirrell while McGonagall was examining the troll and Snape was examining Hermione's wand with the focused attention of someone looking for something specific. Quirrell was standing at the edge of the bathroom looking at the unconscious troll with an expression that was, this time, completely unmasked because he didn't know Harry was watching him. Disappointment. Faint, swiftly controlled, but there. A troll in the dungeons, not the dungeons, the second-floor bathroom, which meant someone had misdirected it, and 2 first-year students had survived it and it had been resolved before it could become something larger. He'd wanted it to become something larger. Harry filed this under, Quirrell is not a passive actor. He's creating opportunities. For what? He stored the thought and went to find Ron, who was in the corridor looking slightly pale and significantly relieved, and who said, when he saw Harry and Hermione both intact, that was, I mean. The chandelier. That was Hermione, Harry said. Hermione, who had been quiet since the professors arrived, made a sound. It was both of us, she said. She looked at Harry with the specific expression she was building, the one that had several layers, the topmost of which was intellectual respect and the layer under that was something more personal and slightly defensive. You wouldn't have known about the chandelier without me. I would have figured it out eventually. Eventually and before the troll hit you are different timelines, she said. Ron laughed, the genuine, full-faced laugh that Harry had been cataloging since the train. She's got you there. Harry looked at both of them. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying you're going to be very annoyed about it. He thought about the specific warmth that was running through him right now, the thing he had been very carefully putting in a box and also had completely failed to put in a box because it kept growing and filling the available space regardless. Yes, he said. She does. Hermione blinked. She seemed to have expected continued argument. The lack of it briefly destabilized her. Thank you, she said, eventually, quietly. Both of you. It was directed at them both but she was looking at the floor when she said it, which in Hermione's emotional vocabulary he'd learned meant this matters and I'm deciding how much to let it show. You handled it, Ron said easily. The chandelier was brilliant. It was applied physics, she said. Applied physics that knocked out a mountain troll, Ron said. I'm going to count that. Harry said nothing. He let the hallway settle around them, the stone and the torchlight and the three of them standing in the aftermath of something that hadn't killed any of them, and he did the thing Ron had told him to do. He didn't analyze it. He didn't assess it. He didn't put it in a file or a box or a strategic framework. He just stood there and let it be what it was. Which was, he thought, simply and without qualification, the best he'd felt since the castle came out of the mist on the lake. McGonagall's office the next morning was organized with the precision of a woman who did not tolerate disorder and also revealed, in the specific objects on the desk and shelves, a great deal about what she valued. Miniature Quidditch figures that moved. A framed photograph of a graduating class, 1968, in which she was young and laughing. A jar of ginger newts that she offered him without comment. He took one. It was very good. Account, she said. He gave it, fully, accurately, without editing the timeline or his movements through the building against the flow of the evacuation. He watched her face as he laid it out, and her face maintained its careful neutrality throughout until he got to the part about Quirrell's expression. Disappointment, she said. Controlled. Brief. But yes. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. She looked at the miniature Quidditch figures, which were doing a complicated practice pattern. You're telling me you believe a member of this staff directed a troll into the castle deliberately? I'm telling you what I observed. He was careful with this. Not accusation. Observation. You also observed, the previous night, Professor Quirrell in a corridor conversation with an unidentified individual. Yes. And you did not come to me with this information. I didn't have enough data to present a coherent picture, Harry said. I'm presenting it now because after last night I think the picture is coherent enough to be useful. McGonagall looked at him for a long time. Outside her window, the grounds were gray and the lake was flat under an October sky pressing low. You're 11 years old, she said. Yes. You're telling me a behavioral analysis of a teaching colleague based on observational data and threat profile methodology. Yes. Silence. Your mother, McGonagall said slowly. Tell me about your mother. She keeps an extensive collection of books, Harry said. The corner of McGonagall's mouth made its movement. Indeed. She picked up a ginger newt, considered it, put it back. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I'm telling you because I believe you've earned it. She looked at him directly. You are not the first person to have concerns about Professor Quirrell this year. You are, however, the first to have constructed an evidence-based behavioral profile from independent observation. That is. She seemed to be selecting a word carefully. Remarkable. And concerning. In equal measure. I understand why it's concerning, Harry said. Do you? I'm 11. The methodology suggests an education that isn't standard. The methodology suggests an education that most trained professionals don't receive, she said, with a precision that let him know she was not being hyperbolic. I'm not going to ask you to explain it. I'm going to ask you to be careful. She leaned forward slightly. Not careful in the operational sense. Careful in the, there are people in this building who would find your capabilities very convenient, Mr. Romanoff Potter. Very useful. And not necessarily for your benefit. Harry looked at her. I know. Do you know who I'm referring to? I have a preliminary assessment, he said. McGonagall held his gaze. Keep it preliminary, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite warning and not quite plea, something that might have been the sound of a person who cared, specifically and genuinely, about what happened to a child in her house, and who was navigating the exact same institutional walls that child was navigating, from a different angle and with different constraints. He understood this. He understood it better than she probably expected him to. I will, he said. And then, because it was true and because she'd been honest with him and honesty in this building seemed like something worth reciprocating when the opportunity was real, thank you. For, not dismissing it. McGonagall looked at him for one more moment. You are, she said, profoundly unusual. She pushed the jar of ginger newts toward him. Take another one. He took another one. November came in cold and grey and Quidditch began. Harry had been made Gryffindor Seeker by Oliver Wood before the end of October, which had happened as a direct consequence of the flying lesson incident. Wood had apparently witnessed the third-floor corridor fly-in catch and had gone directly to McGonagall in a state of barely contained enthusiasm. McGonagall had told Harry with the brisk practicality of someone announcing a schedule change, and had also slipped him a broomstick key card without comment. The Nimbus 2000 was extraordinary. Harry had ridden it twice in the week before the Slytherin match and on both occasions had needed to have a private conversation with himself about keeping his expression neutral, because the Nimbus was a different class of experience than the school brooms entirely, responsive at a neurological level, sensitive to intention before action, faster than anything he'd been on and cleaner and more precise in a way that was almost language. He thought about the note he'd sent Natasha. Flying is extraordinary. He thought about not having enough words for it. She'd written back one line, don't die. Standard sign-off. He'd been reading it differently lately. The Slytherin match was played in November rain that the wind drove sideways. Harry sat in the Gryffindor locker room and listened to Wood's tactical briefing, which was passionate and detailed and somewhat redundant given that Harry had already reviewed the Slytherin Seeker's profile in the student records Hermione had accessed through the library's Quidditch history section. Terence Higgs, 4th year, fast in straight lines, conservative in his search pattern, predictable. The match itself was organized chaos from the first whistle. Gryffindor versus Slytherin played at full speed in cold rain under roaring stands, the chasers moving like weather patterns and the bludgers like artillery. Harry flew above all of it, above the noise and the rain and the tactical map of the pitch, and searched. He found the snitch in the 14th minute, darting along the Slytherin goalposts. The moment he saw it, his broom was already turning, not because he'd made a conscious decision but because the decision and the movement were a single thing now, the same way that certain physical responses had become single things through years of training. He was in a dive before he'd thought the word dive and the wind was horizontal and the pitch was tilting and the snitch was accelerating and he was accelerating faster. He came out of the dive at 15 feet, closed his fist around the snitch at 12, and heard the roar of the stands at 10, and pulled up at 7 with the gold wings fluttering between his fingers and the rain on his face and the thing in his chest doing something enormous that he didn't try to contain. He stayed at altitude for a moment longer than necessary. Just breathing. Just the sky. Then he came down. Ron was the first one to reach him, sprinting from the stands with no tactical subtlety whatsoever, face-splitting. He grabbed Harry's arm and said something that the crowd noise swallowed completely, but Harry read his mouth. 14 minutes. Hermione came through the crowd behind him with the controlled urgency of someone who had been watching with precise attention and had several observations she needed to share. The broom movement in the final dive was, you adjusted the approach angle twice. I was watching through these. She had binoculars. Of course she had binoculars. You saw the snitch change direction. It was going to go right, Harry said. How did you know? It had been trending right in its flight pattern for the last 2 minutes. Minor course corrections toward the right. By the time I was close enough to force it into evasive movement, right was the established default. He paused. Also it looked right. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, wrote something in the small notebook that had appeared from her robes. I want to talk about the aerodynamics of the final pull-up, she said, but Ron is trying to get your attention. Ron was, in fact, in the process of attempting to hoist Harry's arm in the air in the manner of a boxing champion, which was neither the situation nor something Harry particularly needed, but which expressed a quality of uncomplicated delight that was so entirely Ron that he let it happen without protest. He held the snitch up and the Gryffindor stands were loud and the rain was still coming down and the warmth in his chest was doing something that had no operational category and he was, he realized, completely fine with that. The letter from Natasha came on a Sunday morning in mid-November, and this time it wasn't burned. It was 3 paragraphs. He read it twice. The first paragraph was operational, Quirrell profile aligned with her assessment. Keep distance, observe, do not engage directly until the picture is clearer. Dumbledore is aware you've been paying attention. She didn't say how she knew this. She always knew things through angles he hadn't tracked yet, which was one of the ongoing educational experiences of having her as his primary handler and also his mother. The second paragraph said, McGonagall's name came up in a Fury briefing this month. I won't tell you the context because you'll draw the right conclusions from insufficient data and act on them. What I will tell you is that she's been in this longer than you think and she's playing a longer game than she lets on. Don't mistake careful for passive. He read this twice and thought about the miniature Quidditch figures and the photograph of the 1968 graduating class. The third paragraph said, Dova looks well. I hear Scotland in November is cold. Are you eating properly? And Harry looked at the letter for a moment. Then he wrote back, in Russian, 3 paragraphs. The first was operational, troll incident as previously noted via cipher. Chandelier solution was Granger. Weasley proving consistent, trustworthy, and more strategically capable than initial profile suggested. Recommend upward revision on both assessments. The second said, I understand your point about McGonagall. I've revised my assessment already, there's a larger map here than I can see from this position. Working on the visibility. The third said, Scotland in November is very cold. The food is excellent. Vdova is happy. I caught the snitch in 14 minutes. He paused. Then he added, I think I'm where I should be. Thought you should know that too. He tied it to Vdova's leg. She regarded him with the amber-eyed equanimity of an owl who had been delivering these letters her entire life and found them appropriate. Safe flight, he told her, which he always said. She took off from the Ollery window into the grey November sky, climbing steadily, and he watched her go until she was a small dark shape against the clouds and then gone. He put his hands in his pockets and went back inside, and the castle breathed around him in the way it did, deep and constant and sure, and he walked through it in the particular quality of someone who did not yet have all the answers but who was, for the first time in his life, not conducting the search alone. Chapter 4, read on the ledger. The mirror appeared on a Tuesday in December. Harry found it because he wasn't looking for it, the second-floor corridor had an unscheduled empty period after Professor Sprout cancelled herbology due to a situation involving a mildly aggressive puffapod that had apparently developed opinions about being repotted, and Harry had been using the time to map a section of the castle's eastern wing he hadn't fully charted yet. Not for any specific operational reason. Just because unmapped spaces were unacceptable to him in a building he was living in, the same way an unlocked door at the perimeter of a safe house was unacceptable, not an immediate threat, just a gap in the picture. The room was behind a tapestry that moved wrong. Most tapestries in Hogwarts moved slightly in the drafts from the windows and the ghost traffic, but this one moved differently, perpendicular to the dominant airflow, which meant the draft was coming from behind it. He pushed it aside and the room was there. Large. Empty. Dusty in the specific way of spaces that saw intermittent rather than regular use. High windows letting in the gray December light, and against the far wall, the mirror. It was taller than he was, framed in elaborate gold, and the inscription along the top edge read, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He translated it in 3 seconds, mirror reversal, I show not your face but your heart's desire, and then he looked at the glass. The reflection was wrong. Not broken, not distorted. Wrong in the specific way of something showing you something other than what's in front of it. He was standing alone in an empty room and the mirror showed him standing in the same room but not alone. He looked at the reflection for a long time without moving. There was a woman beside him in the glass. Red hair, not Weasley red but darker, deeper. She was standing close, not touching him but close in the way of someone who was always close, who was orientation and north point and a fixed variable in every environmental assessment. She was laughing, not the controlled near smile she usually allowed herself but actually laughing, head slightly back, something unwound in her that he had seen in pieces and fragments but never all at once. He had a catalogue of her expressions and this was not in it. There was a man on the other side of him. Dark hair, glasses, and green eyes, the same green eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, a match so precise it resolved every theoretical question about heredity in a single visual. The man had his hand on Harry's shoulder and was saying something to the woman that Harry couldn't hear, and the woman was laughing harder. Harry stood in the empty room and looked at this reflection for 43 seconds before he made himself look away. He stood with his back to the mirror and breathed. The man's face had been open in the way of someone who had never been trained to close it. Glasses slightly crooked. Completely unaware of the sight lines in the room. Harry had looked at him for less than 5 seconds and catalogued these things automatically, and then had catalogued the cataloging and found it insufficient. Irrelevant. A threat assessment of a dead man who was also his father, which was not a framework that produced useful data. He thought about Natasha saying your father had them too, and the way she'd left before he could answer. He turned back to the mirror. The reflection was the same. The woman was still laughing. The man still had his hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry looked at the mirror and thought about the inscription. Heart's desire. Not what you want, what your heart wants, which were different things, and the difference was exactly the gap that Natasha had spent 11 years both teaching him to close and inadvertently making wider. What his heart wanted was standing in a reflected room in a castle in Scotland and could not be retrieved by any operational methodology he currently possessed. He went to dinner. He ate. He told no one about the mirror. He went back 3 more times. He was aware this was not operationally sound behavior. He went anyway. The 3rd time, he was not alone. Dumbledore was sitting in a chair beside the mirror, which had not been there before, which meant it had been placed there, which meant Dumbledore had either been monitoring the room or had been monitoring Harry, and both options pointed to the same conclusion. He was sitting with the relaxed composure of someone who had been waiting long enough to be comfortable about it and was reading a small book, which might have been real or might have been the most expensive social prop Harry had seen deployed. Harry stopped in the doorway. Come in, Harry, Dumbledore said, without looking up from the book. I've been expecting you. Harry came in. He stood at a distance from both the mirror and Dumbledore that gave him clear movement options in all directions and watched the old man close the book with the particular leisure of someone who had all the time in the world because they had arranged to have all the time in the world. Dumbledore looked at him. The glacier blue eyes were doing the thing they'd done at the sorting, the full attention assessment wrapped in warmth, the evaluation that also happened to feel like care. It was a remarkable technique. Harry appreciated it technically. "You found our mirror of Erist," Dumbledore said. "A remarkable object. What do you see when you look into it?" Harry had prepared for this question. He'd prepared for it on his second visit, actually, when he'd begun to understand the mirror's nature fully and had also begun to understand that the room's intermittent use didn't mean it was unmonitored. He had a prepared answer. He had thought about it carefully. He looked at Dumbledore and said the prepared answer and then, 2 seconds before the words came out, changed it. "My mother," he said. "She's laughing. She doesn't do that very often." This was true. This was the whole truth and nothing but it. He watched Dumbledore receive it. The old man's expression shifted in a way that was extremely subtle and would have been invisible to most people, a fractional softening, and underneath it, something recalibrating. He'd expected deflection, Harry assessed. He'd expected the prepared answer, or something like it. Actual honesty had landed differently. "Only your mother?" Dumbledore asked. "There was a man," Harry said. "I don't know him well enough to describe what I felt looking at him. So I'll leave it at my mother." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Your mother," he said, "is an extraordinary woman." "Yes. I have met her, you know. Briefly. Several years ago." He paused. "She made several very pointed threats in a very pleasant tone of voice. I found it instructive." Harry felt something in him that was warm and sharp at once. "That sounds right. She loves you very much." Dumbledore said it simply, without performance. "In her own particular way, which is perhaps not a conventional way, but is entirely genuine. You know this." "I know this," Harry agreed. He was watching Dumbledore the way he watched every significant variable, fully, without appearing to do so, and finding, not for the first time, that this man was the most interesting adversarial figure he had yet encountered. Because Dumbledore was not entirely adversarial. That was the complexity of it. He was an adversary who also genuinely cared, and the caring and the manipulation were not separate operations. They were the same operation. That was what made him dangerous. "I wonder," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone introducing a topic they've been approaching for some time, "what you make of Hogwarts. Your first term here." "It's an impressive institution," Harry said. "That's a diplomatic answer. I can be more specific." "Please." Harry thought for exactly as long as it took to decide how specific to be, which was a different calculation than he'd made with McGonagall. McGonagall warranted honesty because she was trustworthy and her framework was consistent with Harry's interests. Dumbledore warranted something more careful, not dishonesty, because Dumbledore would see through dishonesty immediately and the cost of being caught in it was higher than the cost of selective truth. Strategic honesty. Give him real things that don't compromise your position. "Hogwarts is an extraordinary environment for magical education," Harry said. "The quality of instruction is generally high. The social dynamics are more complex than the institutional structure accounts for. And the building itself is," he stopped for a moment, "which was real, not performed. It feels intentional. Not just architecturally. Like the castle itself has a purpose." Dumbledore smiled, and this time the smile was entirely genuine. "She does," he said softly. "She was built with love, which means she loves in return. She protects what is placed within her walls." A pause. "She has been aware of you since you arrived, I think." Harry looked at the mirror. The reflection showed him nothing, his own face looking back, correct and uncomplicated, because Dumbledore's presence had recalibrated the room's atmosphere and he wasn't looking at the glass the same way. I want to tell you something about this mirror, Dumbledore said. Men have wasted away in front of it. Drowned in what they see. The happiest man alive could look into it and see only himself, but for those of us who carry losses, it shows what we most want and what we cannot have. He looked at Harry steadily. It would do you no good to return here. I understand, Harry said. The mirror will be moved tomorrow, Dumbledore said. To a location where it will serve a purpose, but where students will not encounter it casually. Harry looked at him. Thought about the three-headed dog on the third floor. Thought about a philosopher's stone hidden in a school because apparently the most heavily secured bank in the wizarding world was insufficient and a school full of 11-year-olds was the better option. He thought about the mirror serving a purpose and about what purpose a mirror that showed the heart's desire could serve in a security system designed to hide something that shouldn't be used by someone who wanted to use it. He understood the logic. He also thought it was a remarkable piece of engineering that was simultaneously the most elegant trap and the most poetic one. Only someone who wanted the stone for itself would see it in the mirror, because only they would see themselves using it. Someone who wanted it for pure reasons would see something else entirely. He thought about what Quirrell would see. He thought about what Quirrell's master would see. Professor, Harry said, as Dumbledore stood. The old man looked at him. The thing being guarded here, Harry said, carefully. It's going to be targeted before the year is out. You know that. A silence that was very long and very specific. I am aware of the possibility, Dumbledore said. Not the possibility, Harry said. Not a challenge. Just, accurate. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment that felt geological in its weight. Then he said, no. Not the possibility. He picked up his small book. You are remarkably perceptive for someone your age. My mother keeps an extensive collection of books, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes did something complicated and brief. Yes, he said. I imagine she does. He moved toward the door, paused. Harry. Whatever you know, or think you know, there are certain things that must unfold in their own time. I want you to understand that I am watching over this situation with considerable attention. I know, Harry said. I wanted you to know that I know. Dumbledore stopped. He was looking at the wall rather than at Harry, and his expression, for one unguarded second, was that of a man confronting something he had not fully prepared for. Then it was gone. Good night, he said. Good night, Harry said. He stayed in the room for a moment after Dumbledore left. He looked at the mirror. His own face looked back, unreadable. He thought, he is planning around you. He has always been planning around you. And he's just discovered that the piece on his board has been watching the board. He thought about what that changed and what it didn't. Then he went to bed and slept without dreaming. He told Natasha everything. Not in code this time, in plain English, in a letter that he sealed with a charm Yevgenia had taught him at age 9 that would make the paper illegible to anyone but the intended recipient. He laid out the mirror, the conversation, his assessment of Dumbledore's knowledge and intentions, and the architecture of the stone's protection system as he currently understood it. He also told her about the reflection. He didn't analyze it. He just described it, in the same plain English, and then he sealed the letter and gave it to Vdova and went to breakfast. Vdova came back 4 days later. The reply was 2 pages, which was longer than usual. The first page was operational, her assessment aligned with his. Dumbledore was confirmed as knowing more than he was sharing with Harry, and the critical question was how much more. She was working on an angle from the outside that she couldn't detail in writing but would brief him on over Christmas. Christmas. He was going home for Christmas. He had not realized how much he was looking forward to this until the word appeared in the letter and something in his chest did its thing. The second page was personal, which was rarer than the operational pages and therefore carried more weight by simple scarcity. She wrote, I looked at a mirror once that showed me something I wanted and couldn't have. I stood in front of it too long and Clint found me there and didn't ask what I was looking at, just said we had a briefing in 20 minutes and handed me coffee. That's what a good partner does. They don't make you explain the things that are hard to explain. They just stay close until you're ready to move. She wrote, the man in your mirror. You don't have to do anything with him. He's not a mission. He's not a variable. He's just, she'd crossed something out here, the scratch of it visible through the page, yours. That's all. He's just yours. She wrote, come home in 3 weeks. I'll make pancakes. He read this page twice. Then he folded it into the inner pocket of his robes where he put things he needed to keep close, and went to his first class of the day. Snape had been watching him since October. Not the way McGonagall watched him, the calibrated attention of someone assessing genuine capability, and not the way Dumbledore watched him, the strategic patience of a player monitoring a piece. Snape watched him the way a man watches something that doesn't fit his existing model and refuses to be forced into it. The potions classroom was a cold dungeon, and Snape's pedagogy was the most adversarial Harry had encountered since a Red Room assessor named Volkov, who had believed that the optimal educational environment was one of constant low-grade pressure. Volkov had been correct about the learning efficiency of stress-based instruction and incorrect about the ethics of applying it to children. Snape appeared to operate under similar conclusions, and Harry sat through potions twice a week and produced the required work at the required standard and watched Snape watch him. In November, Snape had asked him 12 direct questions in a single class, the Boil Cure Potion, standard first-year curriculum, and Harry had answered 11 correctly and given an intentionally incomplete answer on the 12th to see how Snape responded to near competence versus full competence. Snape had awarded him 5 points and docked 3, which was mathematically inconclusive but behaviorally revealing. He was looking for a reason to dock points. Not because he disliked Harry specifically. The animosity was consistent across Gryffindors and inconsistent with personal focus. Something about the house. Something about the history. He'd done the reading on Severus Snape. The file was thin because Natasha's information networks didn't prioritize Hogwarts faculty with any depth, but the name Snape connected to the name Potter through a social history that predated Harry's existence by 2 decades, and Harry had a general topology of it even without the details. He decided this was a secondary variable and kept it there. More urgent things required more processing time. December arrived. Hermione's research had confirmed Nicholas Flamel, the Philosopher's Stone, and the basic logic of the protection system. She'd found it through a combination of old alchemical texts, historical records, and the most lateral piece of library research Harry had seen applied. She'd cross-referenced the Gringotts' break-in date with Dumbledore's known schedule and found a Hogsmeade resident who'd seen Dumbledore remove something from the school in late summer. She'd presented this to Harry in the library with the expression of someone who had assembled a jigsaw puzzle in the dark and then turned the light on. Philosopher's Stone, she said. Here. Since August. And Quirrell knows it's here. Quirrell's working for someone, Harry said. The conversation I overheard in October, he was afraid. Not of whoever he was talking to, but of failing them. Afraid of failing someone worse than Quirrell, Hermione said. She considered this. It's not a local problem, Harry agreed. It's Voldemort. She said the name without particular drama, which Ron, who had arrived 3 minutes earlier and was now frozen with a custard tart halfway to his mouth, had not. You can say it, it's just a name, Hermione said. It's really not just a name, Ron said. It's, everyone says you know who. Everyone says you know who because fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself, Hermione said, and Harry looked at her with something that was almost startled because those were almost exactly Natasha's words on the subject, delivered once when he was 8 and had asked about the Red Room with excessive circumlocution. She's right, Harry said. Ron looked between them. The two of you together, he said, are going to either save the world or completely terrify me. Possibly both, Hermione said. Definitely both, Harry said, and Ron laughed his full laugh and shook his head and ate the custard tart. He dreamed about his father for the first time on a Wednesday night in mid-December. Not the mirror. Not the laughing woman and the hand on his shoulder. Something different, a house, briefly, and a door, and a feeling of complete dread that woke him at 3 in the morning with his heart running fast and the dormitory cold around him. He lay still. The feeling faded. He ran his standard environmental check, sounds, temperature, light, and the dormitory was undisturbed and the other boys were asleep and everything was fine. He lay in the dark for a while. He thought about the man with the crooked glasses who had no training and no situational awareness and was dead because of it. He thought about whether that made him angry, and found that it didn't, exactly. What he felt was something more complicated than anger, something that had dimensions he hadn't mapped. Grief was the clinical term, but grief was a word he'd read in psychology texts and it had never connected to personal experience because Natasha's operational education had not included formal instruction on loss in ways that reached the personal level. He was reaching the personal level now and the terrain was unfamiliar. He thought about Natasha's letter. "He's just yours." He put the feeling in the box. Then he took it back out of the box and let it sit in the dark with him until morning. Christmas at the flat on Waterloo Bridge was quietly extraordinary. Natasha had a tree. An actual tree, small, in the corner, with lights that were not magical but cast a warm color that made the flat look like somewhere people lived instead of somewhere people staged. She had made the flat look like somewhere people lived, which she'd done in increments over 11 years and which Harry had stopped noticing until he walked in from the cold on December 22nd and walked back into it after 3 months away and saw it freshly. The books on the shelves. The chess set that was always mid-game because they never actually finished a game, they just left it set up for the next session. The 2 coffee mugs by the kettle that were slightly different sizes. The photograph on the mantelpiece, the only photograph, taken when Harry was 4, both of them looking at the camera with the same expression, which was not a smile exactly but was a very specific kind of attention that was better than a smile. Natasha was in the kitchen. She was making pancakes. It was not Tuesday. He put his bag down and stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, the total competence and economy of her movements, the way she inhabited a space, the way even making pancakes had the quality of someone who was fully present in what they were doing. She had a bruise on her left forearm that hadn't been there 3 months ago and she was moving around it slightly, protecting it without being obvious about it, which meant it was a few days old and still hurt. "Fury's keeping you busy," he said. She turned. Her face did the thing, the not smile, the real version, the one he'd been cataloging for 11 years and that the mirror had shown him laughing but that in real life was this, was exactly this, and it was enough. It was entirely enough. "You're taller," she said. "I grew. Annoyingly so." She turned back to the stove. "Sit down. Tell me everything you left out of the letters." He sat at the kitchen table. He told her everything, not the operational summary, which she already had, but the texture of it. The chess games. The broomstick. Hermione's chandelier pendulum and the specific quality of her mind. Ron sleeping with the arm off the bed. McGonagall's ginger newts. The castle breathing at 6 in the morning. He told her about the sorting hat. She plated the pancakes without turning around. What did it say? It said "I care," Harry said. In the middle of its analysis. Like it was the most significant data point. She put the plate in front of him and sat across the table. She poured coffee for herself and did not look at him directly, which he'd learned early meant she was about to say something she'd been considering for a while. "You've always cared," she said. "That's not new. It said I'd be annoyed about it." "Were you?" He looked at the pancakes. "A little," he said. "Then less." She turned her mug in her hands. Outside the flat window, the Thames was grey and the Christmas lights on the bridge were gold in the wet air and it was, Harry thought, the specific colour of every good thing he'd ever associated with this flat, this woman, this life, warm against grey, gold against cold. "I'm going to tell you something," Natasha said. "That I've been deciding whether to tell you for about 6 years." He looked at her. "When you were born," she said, "I made a decision in about 45 seconds. I made it in the hospital and Fury was there and he had 4 operational alternatives to suggest and I told him to put them all in a file and burn the file. She paused. He didn't burn it. He never burns anything. But I said it. Harry waited. The decision, she said, was that I was keeping you regardless of what any operational framework suggested. And that I was going to prepare you for everything I could think of, which is what I did, and I'd do it the same way again. She looked up. But there's a version of preparation I didn't give you and I've been thinking about how to give it to you now that you're older. What version? She put the mug down. Permission, she said. To want things that aren't on the mission. To need things that aren't tactical. To have, she stopped, and the stop was real, was genuine difficulty with the words, which happened so rarely that it carried enormous weight. People. To have people, Harry. Not assets. Not contacts. People who are yours because you chose them and they chose you, and that's the whole of the reason. He looked at her for a long moment. The Weasley boy, she said. Granger. McGonagall, in her way. She picked up the mug again. I've been reading your letters and seeing something I didn't build into you and I wanted to, it's the right thing. What's happening? It's what's supposed to happen. You're saying it's okay to have friends, Harry said. I'm saying it's not just okay, she said. It's the thing I did worst by you, not giving you the framework for it earlier. You had to figure it out on your own and you're figuring it out right and that's, she stopped again. Her jaw was slightly tight in the way that meant strong feeling was being processed carefully. That's the thing I'm most proud of. This year. Harry looked at her across the kitchen table, with the Christmas lights gold through the window and the chess set mid-game in the other room, and he thought about what it cost someone like her to say the word proud out loud to someone else's face and he thought about the mirror and the laughing woman and the I show not your face but your heart's desire. I know, he said, which was inadequate and also complete. She stood up and collected her coffee and said, without looking at him, eat your pancakes before they're cold. He ate his pancakes. They spent 4 days in the flat, which was the longest continuous time they'd been in the same location in 3 years. On the first day Natasha gave him the Quirrell briefing from the outside, what Fury's network had assembled about the past 12 months of dark magical activity across Europe, the pattern of it, the shape of something gathering in the east that moved with old intelligence. Voldemort, Harry said. Not gone. Diminished. Not gone, she confirmed. And looking for a body. The stone would do it, a regenerative artifact of that power could anchor him to physical form. Quirrell is his vector. Quirrell is afraid of him, Harry said. That's what carriers feel, Natasha said, with a flatness that said, I know what it is to be used by something you fear. It doesn't make him less dangerous. On the second day they sparred, which was how they caught up in the language that came most naturally to both of them. The back room of the flat had been cleared for exactly this purpose for as long as Harry could remember, mats on the floor, weapons rack on the wall that held nothing lethal in a city where carrying lethal weapons without authorization was complicated. Natasha was faster than anyone he trained with and better than anyone he trained against, and the first 3 rounds she put him on the mat with efficiency that was also, he'd come to understand, a form of affection. The 4th round he put her on the mat. She looked up at him from the floor with an expression that was surprise and something else, the specific quality of a person encountering confirmation of a thing they'd hoped for. When did you get that fast? Broomstick, he said. The reflexes transferred. She sat up. Show me the move. He showed her. She told him how to improve it. He improved it. She put him on the mat twice more and he put her on the mat once more and at the end she sat cross-legged on the mat with a bottle of water and said, You're better than me in 3 specific areas now. 4, he said. I wasn't going to mention the 4th. She threw the water bottle at him. He caught it. What's the 4th? Speed in short space. Under 10 feet. He paused. It's the broomstick. The broomstick has improved your hand-to-hand combat reflexes. Apparently. She looked at him with the specific expression she got when something had exceeded her projections. Fury's going to want to debrief you when this year is over. Fury can wait his turn, Harry said. She laughed. He registered this in the specific way of someone encountering the exact image from the mirror, the real version, the version that was available to him in the real world, not the reflection of the unattainable but the actual thing, right here, real and warm and present. He registered it and let himself have it completely. The last evening of the holiday they sat in the living room with the chess set between them and the lights of the bridge coming through the window, and Natasha said, without looking up from the board, "What's your read on Dumbledore?" Full version. Harry moved his knight. He's planning the end of a war that technically ended a decade ago. He believes the war isn't finished because he knows Voldemort isn't gone. He's positioned everything, the stone at Hogwarts, me at Hogwarts, the protection system, with the intention that Voldemort will come for it and be stopped, and he wants the stopping to be me. Not his own people. Not trained agents. You. I think he believes there's something specific about me that makes me the relevant actor. Something about the night about James's death. Something he hasn't told me. Natasha moved her bishop. He's right that there's something specific. Harry looked at her. The night James died, she said carefully, you survived something that killed both of your parents and left a mark on Voldemort. I don't have the complete picture. Neither does Fury. But we know this, Voldemort's curse reflected back from you. We don't know why. She paused. Dumbledore knows why, or thinks he does. And he's using that knowledge as a compass for everything he's planned around you. Harry sat with this. The chess board. The Christmas lights. The flat on Waterloo Bridge where he'd lived his entire life and which felt, tonight, like it had subtly shifted in the way of things that were changing even as they remained the same. He should have told me, Harry said. Yes, Natasha said. He should have. She moved a pawn. He didn't because knowing might change your behavior in ways that compromise his plan. He's managing you. He's trying to. I know. She looked at the board. What are you going to do about it? My job, Harry said. Which is not the job he thinks I'm doing. He moved his queen. Check. She looked at the board for 3 seconds. Then she looked at him with the full attention focus of someone who was, in this moment, not his handler and not his mother but something that was both and neither, someone who had known him from before he had memory and who saw him with a clarity that had no agenda behind it. Check, she confirmed. Then, be careful. Not with Quirrell. With Dumbledore. He's not your enemy. But he's not fully your ally either, and the space between those things is where the most complicated choices live. I know, Harry said. I know you know, she said. I'm saying it anyway. He went home on January 2nd. He walked back through King's Cross and onto the platform, and the Hogwarts Express was there, red and enormous and slightly overdue for maintenance, and the compartment he found had Ron already in it, asleep across 2 seats with the arm hanging off again, which was so reliably, specifically Ron that Harry felt something in his chest loosen all the way. He put his trunk away. He sat down. He looked at Ron sleeping. He thought about Natasha saying people who are yours because you chose them and they chose you. He thought about the chess game mid-played on the table in the flat, where it would stay until he came back. He looked out the window as the train began to move and watched London go past and then the countryside come, and he held the warmth of the last 4 days carefully, the way you held something that mattered, the way he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, and with a genuine commitment that surprised even him, to hold all of it. The castle would be there when the train arrived. He was, for the first time in his life, in no hurry at all. Chapter 5, The Weapons We Make. The thing about being trained to recognize when an operation was entering its final phase was that you couldn't unknow it once you knew it. January went cold and hard, the castle wrapped in frost that made the windows opaque in the mornings and the grounds treacherous underfoot, and Harry moved through it with the specific quality of someone who had been waiting and now felt the wait narrowing. Not impatience. Impatience was a noise in the system. This was sharper, the particular clarity that came when diffuse intelligence began resolving into actionable shape. Quirrell was deteriorating. Not visibly, not to casual observation. The stutter was consistent, the performance maintained. But the behavioral tells were accumulating. He arrived to breakfast later and left earlier. He avoided the other staff in the corridors with an urgency that exceeded his usual avoidance, and twice in January Harry had walked past him and caught something that wasn't garlic underneath the garlic, something older, colder, a smell that connected to nothing in his standard environmental database but landed wrong in the specific way that wrongness always announced itself before the brain had conscious words for it. He was in more pain. Something was costing him more than it had in October. Whatever was on the other side of the turban was growing. Harry wrote none of this to Natasha. He was past the point where the information needed to travel. He'd absorbed everything she'd given him over Christmas and he was operating now from the synthesized picture, the full map, and the next moves were his to make. He started with the library. Hermione found him there on a Saturday morning in late January with 6 books open on the table and a parchment covered in a diagram she'd never seen him use before, not his cipher, not note form, but a visual map. Boxes and connecting lines and specific notations at the intersections. She sat down. She looked at it. "That's the protection system," she said. "As much of it as I can reconstruct from first principles." He moved one of the books toward her. "I know about the dog. The trapdoor underneath it. I can infer at least 4 more layers from the architectural footprint and the staff distribution. There are 7 in this building whose specialties, if you were designing a protection system, would each contribute 1 layer. Sprout, Flitwick, McGonagall, Quirrell, which is interesting, he contributed a layer to a system designed to keep out something he's working for, Snape, Dumbledore, and 1 other I haven't fully identified." Hermione looked at the map. Her pen was already moving. "Quirrell's layer being part of the system is a double function." "Exactly. He knows his own layer perfectly. All other layers are obstacles. But knowing 1 layer inside out gives you orientation inside the whole system. A starting point." He looked at her. "And if you were going to try to reach the stone, you'd want an inside man who'd contributed to the architecture." "Voldemort isn't stupid," Hermione said. "No. He's not." Harry looked at the diagram. "He's been planning this for months. Possibly since before term started. The Gringotts break-in in July was the opening move. They were looking for the stone, found it gone, traced it here. Then Quirrell took the data posting to get inside access. Everything this year," Hermione said slowly, "the troll, Quirrell watching the 3rd floor, tests," Harry said. "Probing the defenses. Learning the system from the inside." He paused. The troll was a distraction. Not for students, for the staff. He wanted to see which teachers responded to which areas, which told him whose protection was on which floor. Hermione put her pen down. She looked at Harry with the expression she had when she was at the border of her model, the edge where what she'd built from books met something that didn't come from books. "How do you know all of this?" she said. Not accusatory. Not even fully a question. More like someone saying a thing aloud that they'd been carrying for a while. Harry looked at her. He thought about use your judgment and thought about Natasha's letter and thought about people who chose you and you chose them and thought about Hermione's chandelier pendulum and every library hour and every flagged page and the notebook with the dividers and the storm sealing question on the first night. "My mother didn't just keep a lot of books," he said. "I know," Hermione said. "I've had operational training since I was very young. Intelligence methodology. Threat assessment. Behavioral analysis." He kept his voice level, not defensive, just factual. "The Red Room. That's the program. It's Russian, originally. The Black Widow program." Hermione was very still. "My mother completed it. She trained me through a modified version from infancy." He looked at the diagram. I was sent here with specific objectives. Some of them are mine. Some of them belong to other people. A pause. I'm currently deciding which is which. Silence stretched between them. Outside the library windows, snow was falling for the third time this week and the grounds were white and quiet. Are we, Hermione started. Stopped. Started again. Ron and I. Are we part of the objectives that belong to other people? The question landed with precision and he felt the quality of it, the specific courage it took to ask it. Not asking if they were in danger. Asking if they were real to him. Asking if the thing that had been building since the train compartment in September was chosen or assigned. No, he said. You're the only thing in this building that I decided on entirely myself. She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. He didn't manage his expression or calibrate his effect. He just sat there and let her see it. Right, she said, eventually. Her voice was slightly different, not upset, something that was actually the opposite of upset. She picked up her pen. Then I want to help with the diagram. He turned it so she could see it fully. The layer I can't identify, I think it's Snape. Snape? She frowned. His specialty would be potions. And there's a room in the sequence that I can't account for through any other staff member's discipline. He paused. Also he's been watching Quirrell since October. Hermione's pen stopped. He has. At the staff table. 3 times I've observed direct sustained attention from Snape to Quirrell during meals. Not casual. Focused. He looked at her. Snape suspects something too. He's been running his own investigation from the inside. Why wouldn't he tell Dumbledore? Maybe he has. Harry considered. Or maybe he doesn't trust the official channels. Or maybe he's waiting until he has enough. He paused. He might be an accidental ally. Snape, Hermione said, with the tone of someone integrating a deeply counterintuitive data point. Snape, Harry confirmed. I know. They worked for 2 more hours. By the end of the session, the diagram had doubled in size and 3 of the previously unresolved intersections had clicked into place through Hermione's library knowledge. She knew the specific characteristics of each professor's published magical work, had cross-referenced them with known protection spell categories, and had identified Flitwick's layer as charms-based and McGonagall's as transfiguration-based with a confidence that Harry found genuinely impressive. When they finally rolled up the parchment, Hermione's copy, she made one with the speed and precision of someone who had taken notes her whole life. She said, "We should tell Ron." "I know. He'll want to be part of it. He'll be hurt if we don't." "I know. He'd been thinking about this. Tonight. Common room, after dinner." She nodded. "Then, Harry." He looked at her. "When this is over, when it's resolved, your mother should meet us." She said it with the matter-of-fact directness that was so entirely Hermione. "She sounds extraordinary." Something in Harry's chest moved in the warm register. "She'd terrify you." "I suspect I'd terrify her slightly as well," Hermione said, with a composure that was entirely genuine and also slightly devastating, and stood up and collected her books. Harry sat for a moment after she left. He rolled his copy of the diagram into his inner pocket, next to the folded page from Natasha's letter that he'd been keeping there since December. He thought, 6 months ago I would have handled this entire situation differently. I would have gone alone. I would have had cleaner operational security and better deniability and a significantly higher probability of mission failure because I'd have missed things that 2 other people's minds and loyalty provided. He thought, I am better with them than without them. Tactically. Every other way. He went to dinner. Ron took it the way Ron took most significant information, with a brief, comprehensive silence, and then with the complete absence of the kind of reaction that most people would have produced. No alarm. No recrimination. No dramatic reassessment of their friendship. He sat in the corner of the common room with his arms folded and looked at the fire and said, "So when you won the chess game in November, the one I thought I'd won fair, you did win it fairly," Harry said. "I'd actually not seen the Queen's sacrifice line." "Right." Ron looked at him. "And the broomstick. The snitch in 14 minutes. That was real." "Okay." Ron unfolded his arms. "And Quirrell is a problem for us now." "Yes. And we think the stone is going to be targeted before the end of term," Hermione said. "The protection layers are being probed. There's a sequence to the attempts. I've mapped the escalation." Ron looked at the diagram she'd spread on the table. He studied it for 30 seconds. He pointed at the section she'd labeled probable chess-based layer, unknown contributor. "Who plays chess that well?" Harry and Hermione both looked at him. Ron looked back. "I'm just saying. If I were building a defense layer using chess, I'd build it with enchanted pieces that respond to real strategy, not just pattern play. Someone who plays chess properly designed that layer." He paused. "I can beat that layer." Silence. "Ron," Harry said, with absolute seriousness. "I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to do anything. This is not a mission assignment. I'm not your handler." "I know." Ron met his eyes. The guileless warmth was still there, but underneath it was something that had always been there and that Harry was only now fully appreciating, a steadiness, a fundamental groundedness that was not trained and not performed and was therefore considerably more reliable than either. "But I'm useful here and you know I'm useful and we're doing this together or I'm going to be extremely annoyed." Hermione said, "He makes a fair point about the chess." Harry looked at both of them. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying you care and thought about Natasha saying to have people and thought about the entire geometry of what was sitting across from him in the firelight, two people who had exactly zero operational training and exactly everything else that the operational training couldn't give him. "Together," he said. Ron nodded like this was always what he'd expected. "Good. Now. Walk me through the layers again, slower this time." February. Snape pulled Harry aside after potions on a Thursday. "Not dramatically," he said, at the end of class as the other students filed out, "A word, Mr. Romanoff Potter," with the specificity of someone who had been deciding to do this for a while and had finally resolved the decision. The classroom emptied. Snape stood behind his desk with his arms folded and his expression configured in the default setting, cool, slightly contemptuous, designed to communicate that the conversation was occurring on his terms. Harry stood in front of the desk and waited. "You've been watching Quirrell," Snape said. Harry said nothing. "Don't perform ignorance," Snape said, with a sharpness that suggested he found the performance insulting. "I've been watching you watch him. Behavioral analysis isn't a subtle art when you know what you're looking at." He paused. "What have you found?" Harry assessed this. Snape had come to him. Snape had initiated the conversation and revealed his own position by doing so. Which meant Snape needed something, information, corroboration, or an angle he didn't currently have. "What have you found?" Harry asked. Snape's eyes narrowed. Not with anger, with the specific reaction of someone receiving an unexpected move. "That's not, you need me for something," Harry said. "Not the other way around. You've been watching him longer than I have and you have faculty access I don't. If you were working from complete information, you'd have gone to Dumbledore already." He paused. "What's the gap?" A very long silence. The potions classroom smelled of things finishing, the remnants of the day's work, acidic and vegetable, fading in the cold dungeon air. Snape looked at him with an expression that was moving through several stages, the outermost layer of contempt thinning in real time to reveal something more complicated underneath. "The protection system," Snape said. "Specifically, whether Quirrell has already compromised his own layer." "He's compromised his own layer," Harry said. "He's also been mapping the others through the troll incident in October and at least 2 other directed observations I can document." Document, Snape repeated. I take notes. Another silence. Snape unfolded his arms. He looked at Harry the way he'd been looking at him since September, the look of a man confronting something his existing model can't fully accommodate, and something shifted in it. Not warmth. Snape did not appear to be in the business of warmth. But a kind of reluctant recalibration. Your father, Snape said, was a reckless idiot. I know, Harry said. You are not your father. No, Harry agreed. That is both a relief and profoundly confusing, Snape said, which was possibly the most honest thing Harry had heard him say, and delivered with the specific dry edge of someone who chose honesty as a weapon and found it occasionally turned in the hand. I'm going to Dumbledore, Snape said. With what I have. It won't be enough, he'll thank me politely and tell me the situation is in hand and do nothing operationally new. He looked at Harry with full directness. What he won't know is that you have a more complete picture than I do. Why are you telling me this? Because if Dumbledore's timeline is wrong, if the attempt on the stone comes sooner than he's planning for, someone who actually knows the system's architecture needs to be in a position to respond. He paused. And because you're going to act regardless, and I'd rather you act with full information than partial. Harry looked at him. You've been watching me since September. You have been distinctly watchable since September, Snape said, which was not a compliment and was also not entirely not a compliment. Your mother trained you well. You know about my mother. I know rather more than you might expect, Snape said, and the sentence carried a weight that Harry filed for later, for the longer conversation that this specific moment was not. Go. Eat dinner. Don't do anything fatal before I've spoken to Dumbledore. Harry went. At the door he paused. Professor. Snape didn't look up from the desk where he'd resumed something. The potions layer, Harry said. The one I couldn't identify. I know it's yours now. 7 bottles. Logic puzzle. A pause. You're insufferable, Snape said. I get that from my mother, Harry said, and left. March. The castle turned toward spring and the tension in it turned differently, not the contained pressure of winter but something released and sharpening at the same time, the way the air changed before weather arrived. Harry felt it in his training in the mornings, his body running at the elevated pitch it went to when the operational environment was approaching a decision point. He told Ron and Hermione, soon. They didn't ask how he knew. They trusted the calibration the way they'd been trusting each other's calibrations since October, the quiet establishment of whose instinct covered which ground that happened in genuine teams without negotiation. He flew more. Not Quidditch, solo, early mornings, before the school woke. The nimbus in the pre-dawn cold with the grounds empty below and the sky turning the specific sequence of colors it turned at that hour, dark gray to pale gray to a thin cold blue that preceded the actual light. He flew without a destination and without a purpose, and this was, he had come to understand, the closest thing he had to meditation, the broomstick responding to him the way it always did, the immediate and total fluency of it, and underneath the movement the specific quality of space that training mind left when it went quiet. On a morning in late March, Natasha was on the ground when he came back. He landed 20 feet away without showing that she'd surprised him, which she hadn't. He'd seen her from altitude, the familiar silhouette in the pre-dawn gray, standing at the edge of the pitch with her hands in her jacket pockets and her face tilted up. He'd kept his altitude for an extra circuit, watching her watch him. Visiting professor, he said. Visiting professor, she confirmed. She was in Muggle clothes, black, which was her default, but she had a visitor's badge from the McGonagall side of things that Harry had been told was coming without being told when. Fury wanted a status briefing on the ground. I volunteered. And McGonagall allowed it. McGonagall organized it, Natasha said, with the specific tone she used for things that confirmed existing assessments. She's been monitoring the situation with more awareness than Dumbledore thinks. She and I had a conversation last autumn that was very productive. Harry looked at her. How productive? Productive enough that I'm here with a visitor's badge and a room in the staff wing. She looked at the pitch, at the dark castle above it. The timeline is compressing. Fury's network is showing increased dark magical activity in the Balkans. Something gathering. Getting stronger. Quirrell's deteriorating, Harry said. Whatever's on the back of his head, it's growing. Or the pressure of maintaining the concealment is increasing. He's spending himself. Voldemort is pushing, Natasha said. He's close to something. If the attempt comes before the end of term, it's coming in May, Harry said. She looked at him. The stone has been here since August. He's been mapping the protection layers since September. That's 8 months of preparation. The remaining layers I've identified can be worked through in a single night by someone with Quirrell's knowledge and Voldemort's magic. The obstacle has never been the protection system. He paused. The obstacle has been Dumbledore's presence. Which is why the attempt will come when Dumbledore leaves the castle. Natasha was quiet. The sky was going from dark grey to pale grey in the east, the first tentative suggestion of light. He'll be lured away, she said. Yes. And Quirrell will move the same night. Harry looked at the castle. I need to be in position before that happens. She turned to face him. Full attention, full seriousness, no performance of any kind. Harry. I know what you're going to say. Tell me anyway. You're going to say that I'm 11, and that this is an active threat at a level that should involve trained personnel, and that the correct play is to alert the appropriate authorities and let them handle the endgame. And the appropriate authorities have been mishandling this since before I arrived. Dumbledore has a plan that uses me as a piece without telling me I'm a piece. Fury's network can't move fast enough when the trigger event happens. Snape is one person and he's constrained by institutional loyalty. He looked at her. And I'm the only person in this building who has a complete picture of the protection system, an operational framework for moving through it, and a personal stake in the outcome. She held his gaze. The specific quality of her attention in this moment was something he'd felt before, during sparring, during difficult briefings, during the times over the years when she'd been deciding whether to let him be what he was or try to pull him back from it. What's the personal stake? She asked. Voldemort killed James, Harry said. And I carry something from that night that I don't fully understand yet. Dumbledore thinks that something makes me the relevant actor in this. I think he might be right. And I think the difference between him being right for his reasons and being right for mine is whether I go in with full knowledge and a clear choice, or whether I'm maneuvered into it. He paused. I want it to be a clear choice. A long silence. The morning birds were starting somewhere across the grounds. The lake was a flat dark mirror below the castle. You go, Natasha said, and I'm 30 seconds behind you. I don't need, not for backup, she said. I'm 30 seconds behind you so that if you go down, someone who's been fighting the Red Room's enemies for 15 years goes through the next door. She said it with absolute evenness, no emotion in the surface, all the emotion in the structural meaning of the words. That's not negotiable. He looked at her for a moment. 30 seconds, he said. 30 seconds, she confirmed. She looked back at the castle. And you tell Weasley and Granger nothing until it's over. They'll figure it out, Harry said. Of course they will. She almost smiled. But let them figure it out after. It happened on a night in early May. Harry knew it was the night because Dumbledore was gone, called to London, an owl from the Ministry, urgent and legitimate on its surface and probably not on its second surface. He knew because when he passed Quirrell in the corridor after dinner, the smell was worse than it had been and the man's hands were unsteady and the calculation in his eyes had resolved to the specific clarity of someone who had decided. He went to the common room. Hermione was reading by the fire. Ron was mid-game with himself, working through a chess problem. He sat down. He played 3 moves of chess with Ron. He said goodnight to Hermione when she went up. He sat until the fire went low and the common room was quiet and the clock on the mantelpiece moved past midnight. Then he went. He had a map in his head, every layer, every transition point, the precise sequence. He moved through the castle with the quietness that had been his default since childhood, through the third-floor corridor, past the first door, and stood in front of the one that led to the dog. He had his wand out and he had, tucked in his left hand, a small enchanted flute that Hermione had researched and prepared without being told to, had left on his bedside table 3 days ago with a note that said only, "For the dog. C major." He stood in the dark and felt the particular quality of being exactly where an operation had been pointing for months and of having walked toward it with clear eyes. He opened the door. The dog was awake. All 3 heads swung toward him and the pre-growls started in all 3 chests simultaneously, a chord of threat. Harry lifted the flute and played. He'd learned flute at age 7 because Natasha had decided musical training developed fine motor control and pattern recognition. He had never been grateful for this decision more specifically than now. C major, simple, sustained, and the dog's 3 heads swung down one by one like great weights surrendering to gravity, the snarls softening into something that was almost peaceful, and by the 4th bar all 3 were on the stone floor with 3 pairs of eyes closing. He stepped over the dog. He found the trapdoor. He dropped through. Devil's snare, Hermione's voice in his head, clear as annotation, Devil's snare hates light and heat. Just relax. Don't struggle. He relaxed. The plant released him in seconds and he landed soft. A corridor, then a room full of flying keys. He assessed the swarm, hundreds of winged keys circling the ceiling, one lock on the door ahead, one right key somewhere in the chaos. Pattern, the right key would be the most damaged one. Every student who'd gotten this far had tried the same key and the lock had taken its toll. He spotted it on the 3rd pass, older, bent left wing, brass tarnished differently from the others. He went up, which required the broom and the broom wasn't here, but levitation was and he put himself 12 feet off the ground on a Wingardium Leviosa aimed at himself, technically advanced, technically on the edge of what a first year was supposed to manage, technically fine. He caught the key on the 2nd attempt and unlocked the door before the swarm reorganized. The chess room. The board was enormous, the pieces man-high in black and white marble, and the board stretched the full width of the room. He looked at it. He thought of Ron saying I can beat that layer and thought about whether he could beat it himself. He looked at the white pieces. He looked at the board configuration. Then he walked to the white queen and said, clearly, knight to f3. The queen looked at him. He held her gaze. She was marble and enchanted and enormous and Harry Romanoff Potter stood in front of her with his shoulders straight and his eyes steady and she pivoted, slowly, and the knight moved. He played the board in 7 moves. Not the way Ron would have played it, not the intuitive, flowing chess of someone born to it, but analytically, efficiently, forcing the black king into a sequence it couldn't escape. The black pieces didn't attack him. He'd read the system right, you had to play the game, not fight through it. The game had rules and the rules were the point. Checkmate. The black king tipped itself. The troll in the next room was already down, Quirrell had come through before him, and this troll was unconscious and undisturbed. Harry stepped over it and reached the potions room. 7 bottles. Hermione's voice again, logic puzzle, not magic. Most wizards don't reason through this properly because they don't think in formal logic. A riddle on the table. He read it once, identified the answer in 2 readings, forward and backward safety against traps in the riddle's construction, took the smallest bottle, and went through the black fire. The chamber beyond the black fire was large and warm and lit by some sourceless magical illumination, and the mirror of Eriste stood at the far end of it, and in front of the mirror was Quirrell. He was standing with his back to Harry, facing the glass, and his turban was off. On the back of his head was a face. Harry looked at it. He had known, intellectually, what was here. The knowledge and the reality were 2 different experiences and the 2 seconds he took to integrate them were the most important 2 seconds of the night. Because what was on the back of Quirrell's head was a face that had once been handsome and was now something that had been stretched by decades of inhabiting the wrong form, livid and thin, red-eyed, with nostrils that were slits in pale skin and a gaze that contained a depth of intelligence and will that Harry felt across the room like pressure. Lord Voldemort. Not a story. Not a profile. Not a name said carefully in operational briefings. Here, physical, present. He looked back at Harry with eyes that were taking him in with the same thoroughness, and he felt the assessment and the weight of it and did not move. "Harry Potter," said the face on the back of Quirrell's head. The voice was thin and cold and precise. "I have been wondering when we would meet." "I've been wondering the same thing," Harry said. Quirrell turned. His own face was grey and exhausted, the face of a man who had been used for too long, but his eyes were calculating. He was still in there, still operating, still dangerous. "You walked through all of it," Quirrell said, with something that might have been genuine surprise beneath the fear. "Yes. You're a child," Quirrell said. "You keep saying that to yourself," Harry said. "I can tell. It's the thing that doesn't fit your model." He looked past Quirrell at the mirror. "The stone. You haven't gotten it yet." "The mirror shows it to me but will not give it," Voldemort said, from the back of Quirrell's head. His voice was very controlled and very cold. "Unless the one who faces it wants it but does not want to use it." A clever trap. A pause. "Come here." Harry didn't move. He stood his ground and looked at the two faces, Quirrell's exhausted desperation in front and Voldemort's cold precision behind, and thought about the years of preparation that had brought him to this specific room and thought about what Natasha had said, "You want it to be a clear choice." "I've read about you," Harry said, to the face on the back of the head. "Tom Riddle, originally. Excellent academic record at this school. Exceptional magical ability. Came from nothing, made himself into something, and then spent 50 years unmade by what he made himself into." A silence. "You are extraordinarily presumptuous for an 11-year-old, Voldemort said. "I'm told that a lot," Harry said. "What does it mean that you need a child to get you what you want?" "A man who restructured his entire identity around power, reduced to inhabiting the back of a frightened teacher's head, trying to use a first-year student to retrieve what you can't retrieve yourself." Harry. Quirrell's voice, genuinely Quirrell's, not Voldemort's, coming from the right place. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand it better than you think," Harry said. "I understand that whatever he's promised you isn't a promise he can keep. He doesn't keep people. He keeps pieces." Quirrell's face flickered. Something real, something that was the remnant of the man who had existed before a year in the forests of Albania had let something in. He said what you needed to hear," Harry said, simply and without cruelty. "That's what handlers do." "Enough," said Voldemort. The word was cold and final and hit the room differently than anything before it, a weight of will that was tangible, a pressure that pushed against Harry's mind with the specific quality of something vast trying to get purchase. "Come to the mirror. Look into it. Tell me what you see." Harry walked toward the mirror. Not because Voldemort told him to. Because he'd made the decision 3 steps ago and the decision was operational: get to the mirror, look into it, determine whether the stone would come to him the way the protection system had been designed to produce. He wanted it but not to use it, which was precisely the condition required, and then determine what to do with it. He stood before the glass. He looked. His reflection looked back. In the mirror, his reflection reached into its pocket and took out a small red stone that caught the light and burned like something alive, and held it up, and the stone was in the reflection's hand. Harry felt his own pocket move. He looked down. His hand closed around something warm and solid. The stone was in his hand. He didn't look at Quirrell. He looked at the mirror, at his own face in the glass, and at the reflection of the room behind him, and at the barely visible shimmer at the back of the room that wasn't fire and wasn't magic and that he would not have caught if he hadn't been looking specifically for it. 30 seconds. Natasha was in the room. He could feel Voldemort pressing at his mind, not in the invasive, taking way, more like fingers finding a locked door, testing the edges. The pressure was real and significant, and Harry felt the full weight of what was pushing against him. He felt something else too. Something that had been in him since he was born, since the night in Godric's Hollow that had ended one life and started another, that had marked him in a way that neither Natasha nor Fury nor Dumbledore fully understood. It ran under his magic the way a current ran under water, always there, directional, moving toward something. He'd felt it in glimpses, the broomstick responding before he moved, the transfiguration in the first class, moments when the magic did something that his conscious intention hadn't fully accounted for. He felt it now fully for the first time. Something in him that was not training and not instinct but older than both, something that recognized the pressure on his mind and stood against it the way a shore stands against water, not by force but by presence. By being there. By being what it was. He turned to face Voldemort. "You want the stone," he said. "Give it to me," Voldemort said. The control in his voice was absolute except at the edges, where something showed through that was not entirely different from Quirrell's exhausted desperation. Need. The thing that Voldemort had been running from his entire existence, the need to not die, the fear of it, the consuming terror dressed as ambition. Harry looked at the face on the back of the head. He thought about identity versus conditioning. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying the choice, in the end, is simpler than you're making it. "The difference between us," Harry said, "is that I know what I'm afraid of." Something moved in Voldemort's red eyes. "And what is that?" "Becoming something that forgets why it started." He kept his voice level. "You were brilliant. Tom Riddle was genuinely brilliant. And somewhere in the process of surviving, you lost the thing that made the survival worth anything." He paused. "I'm not going to let that happen to me." "You presume to lecture me," Voldemort said, and the control broke, just slightly, just for a second, and underneath it was something that was recognizable because it lived in the same family of feelings as grief. "You're a child with a dead father and an assassin mother, and you know nothing about survival." "I know that survival isn't the highest ambition," Harry said. "I know that from someone who survived things you haven't. Give me the stone." "No." Quirrell moved, fast, both hands coming for Harry's throat, and Harry's body responded before conscious thought with the fluid economy of 11 years of training. He turned, took Quirrell's wrist, redirected the force, used the momentum. His hands locked on Quirrell's arm. Quirrell screamed. Not from the redirection, from the contact. His skin where Harry touched it was blistering, searing, the specific magic that Harry didn't fully understand and had always underrun his training was running hot through his palms, and Quirrell was burning from it, and Voldemort was screaming from the back of his head with a sound that wasn't entirely sound, was more like the mind being scraped. Harry held on. He kept contact, and he let the thing that had always been in him run fully for the first time without containing or directing it, and Quirrell was going down, and Voldemort's scream was thinning, and the chamber was bright with something that wasn't quite light. Then Quirrell went limp. Harry stepped back. His hands were shaking, the physical response to adrenaline and the after-effect of running something through his palms that had never run that hard before. He looked at Quirrell on the floor. The face on the back of his head was gone. Not dead, he could feel that Voldemort was not dead, the way you feel a storm has passed but not dissipated. Dispersed. Disconnected from the body that had been carrying him. Back to the formless in-between state that was all he had without the stone. Harry stood in the chamber and held the stone in one hand, and the other hand was still shaking, and he breathed. Natasha was beside him. Not dramatically, she was simply there, the way she was always there in the rooms that mattered, close and present and not requiring any particular acknowledgement. She looked at Quirrell on the floor. She looked at Harry's shaking hand. She looked at his face. "The stone," she said. He held it up. Small, red, warm as a coal. Quirrell. Alive. Voldemort's detached from him. He'll need medical attention. He looked at Quirrell's unconscious face. The gray exhaustion was still there, but something else had changed. Whatever had been inhabiting him was gone, and what remained looked smaller and sadder and entirely human. He was afraid, the whole time. He was afraid of him and he did it anyway because he was more afraid of what Voldemort would do to him if he didn't. Stockholm architecture, Natasha said. Not uncommon. I know. He looked at her. 30 seconds was actually about 4 minutes. I was waiting for you to need me. And when I didn't, I stayed anyway, she said. That's the job. He looked at her in the warm sourceless light of the chamber, with the stone in his hand and the shaking mostly stopped, and thought about every letter he'd written this year and every letter she'd written back, and thought about the mirror's reflection of a woman laughing that he'd stood in front of for 43 seconds 3 months ago. I know what I saw in the mirror, he said. When I stood in front of it. The first time. She looked at him. She didn't ask. You were laughing, he said. Actually laughing. And James was there. And it was, normal. Just normal. All of us in a room, just being there. He paused. That's what it showed me. That's the heart's desire apparently. The thing that crossed her face was there for 2 seconds and then controlled. But he'd seen it. He'd see it every time she chose to surface it and it would always be enough because it was real. Yeah, she said quietly. That tracks. He put the stone in his pocket. Dumbledore is going to want it. Dumbledore is going to get it, she said. After a conversation about operational transparency and the ethics of using a child as a piece on a board without adequate disclosure. She said it with the pleasant tone she used for threats. I've been composing that conversation for several months. I'd like to be there for it. Obviously, she said. You're the primary grievance. They stood in the chamber for a moment, the stone in his pocket, Quirrell unconscious on the floor, the mirror behind them showing them both exactly what was there, no desire, just reflection. Then Natasha said, Can you walk? Yes. Your hands stopped shaking. Good. She turned toward the way back. Then let's go. You've got school tomorrow. Harry looked at the chamber one more time, at the mirror, at the extinguished fire, at the physical evidence of a confrontation that had been building since October and possibly since longer than that. He thought about the enormous, patient chess game that Dumbledore had been playing and about the piece that had decided, somewhere in the middle of it, to play its own game instead. He thought about Ron's chess intuition and Hermione's chandelier pendulum and Snape's dry honesty and McGonagall's ginger newts and flying at dawn with the castle beneath him and the sky going from dark to light. He thought about all of it constituting something he would, going forward, call his life. Then he followed his mother through the black fire and the logic puzzle and the chess room and the flying keys and the devil's snare and the sleeping dog and back up into the cold stone corridors of a castle that breathed at 6 in the morning like it was glad you were there. Chapter 6, What Remains. He woke up in the hospital wing. Not dramatically, no gasping, no disorientation, no cinematic return to consciousness. He was asleep and then he was awake, and the ceiling was white stone and the light through the windows was the specific gold of late afternoon, and Madame Pomfrey was at the far end of the ward doing something precise and efficient with a tray of potions that clinked against each other in a domestically reassuring way. He lay still and ran his inventory. Hands, slightly sensitive, the skin on his palms carrying a residual tenderness that wasn't quite pain. Body, tired in the deep way, the kind of tired that wasn't about sleep but about something fundamental having been spent. Mind, clear. Sharper than expected, actually, as if whatever had run through him in the chamber had cleaned something out on its way through. The stone was not on him. Obviously. Dumbledore would have taken it, or Natasha, or both in the context of the conversation she'd been composing for several months. He wondered how that conversation had gone. He sat up. Lie down, said Madame Pomfrey, from the far end of the ward, without looking up from her tray. I'm fine. You have been unconscious for 14 hours and your palms show magical discharge scarring consistent with contact-based channeling at a level that has no business appearing on an 11-year-old. She picked up 2 potions and walked toward him with the brisk authority of someone who had been handling students who thought they were fine for 30 years. Lie down, Drink these, and when I'm satisfied with your vitals you can sit up. He lay down. He drank the potions. One tasted of copper and something mineral, the other of absolutely nothing at all, which was somehow more alarming than a bad taste. How long have I been here? He asked. Since approximately 2 in the morning. It's currently 4 in the afternoon. She checked his hands with the focused attention of someone who took their work seriously in the specific way that meant care rather than professional obligation. The scarring is healing cleanly. You'll have full sensitivity restored within 48 hours. What about Quirrell? A pause that was clinically minimal but emotionally significant. Professor Quirrell is receiving care, she said, which was the sentence of someone answering accurately and completely and leaving the subtext where it was. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about Quirrell's gray exhausted face and the face on the back of his head and the way the real fear and the performed fear had always been in 2 completely different registers. He survived, he said. Not a question. He survived, Pomfrey confirmed, with the quality of someone delivering an answer that has a complicated context neither party was going to discuss right now. He nodded. He lay back and looked at the ceiling and let the ward settle around him, the small sounds of it, the potions on the tray, the afternoon light moving slowly across the stone floor toward the windows. He'd been in hospital twice before. Once in Moscow when he was 7 and a training exercise had gone wrong with a dislocated shoulder, and once in London when he was 9 and a contacts cover had been blown at exactly the wrong moment and the exfil had been complicated. Both times he'd woken in an unfamiliar facility and run the environmental inventory and been ready to move within 30 seconds. This time he stayed lying down for 20 minutes because Pomfrey told him to and because his hands were sore and because the ceiling was genuinely restful in the way of things that had been built with care and had been doing their one job for a very long time. He thought this was probably what getting better felt like. Ron and Hermione were in the corridor outside the hospital wing. He heard them before Pomfrey opened the ward door, Ron's voice first, lower than usual, carrying the specific controlled quality of someone who had been sitting on adrenaline and worry for 14 hours and was managing both with imperfect success. Then Hermione, precise and quiet, the words indistinct but the tone carrying something that was trying very hard to be calm and was mostly succeeding. Pomfrey opened the door and said, 10 minutes, in the tone of someone granting a conditional parole, and stood back. They came in and stopped. Harry was sitting up, which Pomfrey had finally allowed, legs crossed on the hospital bed, hands in his lap, looking at them with the same expression he had when he looked at things he was still integrating. He felt, very specifically, their relief, not expressed, just present, the way temperature was present, before Ron walked to the bed and sat down uninvited on the edge of it and Hermione took the chair beside it and neither of them said anything for approximately 4 seconds. Then Ron said, "You absolute idiot." Harry looked at him. "Going alone," Ron said, with the precise, quiet intensity of someone who had composed this specific sentence in their head at some point between 2 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon and was now delivering it. "Without telling us." Without, he stopped. His jaw was doing the thing it did when feeling was running faster than words. "We figured it out at about 1 in the morning. Your bed was empty and Hermione said you'd gone and I told your mother not to tell you," Harry said. "Your mother was apparently extremely persuasive on the subject," Hermione said, with a quality in her voice that suggested she had very specific feelings about this that she was currently filing in an orderly way. "She told us afterward. At approximately 3 in the morning, in the corridor outside this ward, which was the first we heard of any of it." She paused. "She is, incidentally, terrifying." "I know," Harry said. "Not in the way I expected," Hermione continued. "She's terrifying in the way of someone who is completely certain about everything they've decided and has absolutely no interest in your opinion of those decisions." A pause. "I found it admirable and also very slightly maddening." "That's her, yes," Harry said. Ron looked at his hands in his lap. "We could have helped." "You did help," Harry said. "Ron, the chess room, I played your opening. The knight to f3 line that sets up the queen's sacrifice." It worked in 6 moves. He watched something move through Ron's expression, the specific recalibration of someone being told their contribution was real and specific, not consolation. And Hermione, the flute and the devil's snare and everything you left on my bedside table. All of it was there when I needed it. Hermione looked at him steadily. You could have told us. I know. You chose not to because you were protecting us. Partly. He looked at his hands. Partly because it was the first thing that was entirely mine to decide and I wanted to decide it by myself. He paused. That probably sounds, no, Ron said. He was looking at Harry with the direct, unguarded attention that was so distinctly his. No, I get it. He did get it, Harry could see. Ron, who had 6 siblings and a shared bedroom and a shared history and had spent his entire life inside a context that was collective by nature, understood, perhaps better than most, the specific need for one thing that was yours. I get it. Hermione said nothing. She was doing the thing where she processed something fully before responding, which took approximately 30 seconds and which Harry had come to read as a form of respect. She didn't react to things about him quickly, she thought them through. 30 seconds, she said eventually. He looked at her. Your mother was 30 seconds behind you, she said. Which means she let you go first. Deliberately. She knew what was in there and she let you go first. She held his gaze. That's not standard operational protocol. No, he agreed. She seemed to be selecting the right word from a list of candidates. That's a very specific kind of love, she said. The kind that trusts the person instead of protecting them from the thing. He looked at her. The hospital wing light was going gold and warm, and the specific quality of the moment, the 3 of them in this room, his hands healing, the castle settling around them into the end of a day that had been long and strange and complete, had a texture that he would, he thought, be able to retrieve perfectly for the rest of his life. She's making pancakes on Thursday, he said. For all of us. If you want. Ron's face opened completely. At your flat? At the flat. In London? That's where it is, yes. Obviously, Ron said, which wasn't an obviously situation at all, it was an extraordinary situation, but that was Ron, the absorptive ease with which he received good things, no suspicion, no deflection. He just took them. Obviously, yeah. He looked at Hermione. Obviously, Hermione said, with the composure of someone who was extremely pleased and was expressing it with the specific restraint of someone who had been raised to be measured about things. Her eyes said something else entirely. Harry looked at both of them. He thought about Natasha's letter. People who are yours because you chose them and you chose them. He thought about the Sorting Hat's prediction. He thought about how wrong and right it both was. Yes, he was annoyed. And yes, it was entirely worth it. 10 minutes is up, Pomfrey announced from the doorway. We were just leaving, Hermione said, standing with the immediate compliance of someone who had a healthy respect for medical authority. She picked up her bag. We'll come back tomorrow. And the day after, Ron said, standing and bumping his knee on the chair leg with the specific physical comedy that accompanied Ron in most spaces. And we want the full account. Everything. Don't leave out the chess. I won't leave out the chess, Harry said. They went. The door closed. Harry lay back and looked at the ceiling and felt the 14 hours of sleep still sitting in him alongside the sore hands and the satisfied quiet of something finished and something else, something new, beginning. Dumbledore came at 8. Madame Pomfrey admitted him with the expression of someone admitting a person who had implicit authority over her in the institutional sense but not in the sense that she actually deferred to anyone when it came to her patients. She said, 15 minutes, and departed with a deliberateness that communicated, I'm listening. Dumbledore sat in the chair Hermione had occupied, which was slightly too small for him and which he settled into with the equanimity of someone who could make any chair look like a throne if he chose to, except he wasn't choosing to tonight. He was sitting in the chair of someone who had come to have a conversation, not conduct one. He looked at Harry for a moment. Harry looked back. "How are your hands?" Dumbledore asked. "Healing. Good." He folded his own hands in his lap. The half-moon spectacles caught the candlelight and his expression was open in a way that Harry hadn't seen before, or had seen, but hadn't seen beneath. The warm benevolence was still there, but the architecture of it had shifted, the way architecture shifts when something load-bearing is removed. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "Several," Harry said. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "Several," he agreed. "I will attempt the most significant one." He paused. The pause was genuine, not theatrical, not a calculated beat, but the pause of someone deciding how to give something real. "The night your father died. The night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow." He stopped again. "What do you know about that night?" "My father was killed. Voldemort tried to kill me." The curse reflected. "Voldemort was destroyed, not killed, destroyed, and I survived with a scar." Harry looked at him steadily. "I know the facts. I don't know the mechanism." "The mechanism," Dumbledore said slowly, "is love." Harry waited. "Your father performed an act of love so complete and so freely given, he died not protecting you from tactics, not from training, but from pure choice, that it created a protection around you that Voldemort's curse could not penetrate." He looked at Harry with the glacier blue eyes, steady and serious and carrying something that was the genuine weight of a man who had been holding this knowledge for 10 years and had made choices about it that he was still deciding how to stand behind. The curse had nowhere to go. It reflected back. "And the protection your father created, through love, through choice, through the complete sacrifice of a person who simply refused to let the people he loved be harmed, that protection lives in you." Harry sat with this. He thought about James Potter. Crooked glasses. Hand on his shoulder. No training, no situational awareness, completely vulnerable in any room he ever walked into. He thought about the dream in December and the cold dread of it and the door and what must have been on the other side of the door. He thought about what it cost a person to stand in front of something that terrifying with no training at all and nothing between them and it except the decision not to move. He thought about Natasha's letter. "He's just yours." "Why didn't you tell me?" Harry said. "Because," Dumbledore said, and the word carried the weight of someone who had been carrying a prepared answer for years and is now, in the moment of delivery, finding it insufficient. "Because I believed that knowing would change you in ways that compromised what you carry. That knowledge of your importance would create in you either an inflated sense of invulnerability or a debilitating sense of obligation, and either would damage the very quality that makes you what you are." "The quality being what?" Harry said. "Choice," Dumbledore said. "The ability to choose freely. Without the burden of prophecy or expectation or the weight of being necessary." He looked at Harry with something in his face that was not entirely professional and not entirely removed from the kind of feeling that McGonagall had shown in her office on a morning in October. "I was wrong," he said. "Not about the importance of free choice. About whether telling you would damage it." He paused. "Your mother made this clear to me. At some considerable length." "How considerable?" "Approximately 90 minutes, Dumbledore said, during which time I was made to feel the full weight of every decision I have made in this matter since before you were born." He said this with a quality that might have been wry and underneath it was entirely serious. "She is a remarkable woman." "I know," Harry said. "She loves you in a way that I have rarely observed," Dumbledore said. "Not softly. Not gently. With the complete and uncompromising commitment of someone who has decided that your flourishing is the most important operational objective they will ever undertake." He looked at the window, where the evening was fully dark now and the grounds were invisible. "She has also informed me that any future plans that involve you as a component without your full knowledge and consent will be reported to Nicholas Fury, the British Ministry of Magic, and apparently 12 newspapers, not all of them magical." "That sounds right," Harry said. "I believed her." "Good," Harry said. "She keeps her threats." They looked at each other across the small space of the hospital ward, the old man and the boy, and the quality of the space between them was different from every previous interaction, not cleared, not resolved, but honest in a way it hadn't been before. Harry thought about McGonagall's letter referencing Dumbledore. She's been in this longer than you think and she's playing a longer game than she lets on. Don't mistake careful for passive. He thought about the specific geometry of a man who genuinely wanted good things and had decided, repeatedly, that managing people toward those things was indistinguishable from wanting them. You're going to keep planning, Harry said. I am, Dumbledore said. It is my nature. And Voldemort isn't gone. No. Last night weakened him significantly. Without a body and without the stone, his options for physical return are limited. But limited is not impossible. He looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention. The war your father died in was not finished. It has been paused. When it resumes, I'll know, Harry said. Fully. Everything you know. Yes, Dumbledore said, and the word was a commitment in the specific way that words become commitments when they're given by people who understand what commitment costs. Yes. You will. He stood, slowly, with the slight effort of an old man whose knees had opinions. There is one more thing. He reached into his robe and set something on the bedside table. A folded piece of parchment. Your father's, Dumbledore said. He was considerably more aware of his environment than the circumstances of his death might suggest. He left this with me when you were born. He looked at it. It was addressed to you. Specifically you, the name and everything. He looked at Harry. I have been deciding when to give it to you since September. Harry looked at the folded parchment. I should have given it on the first day, Dumbledore said. Another error I'm adding to the list. He moved toward the door. Good night, Harry. Good night, Harry said. The door closed. He sat with the parchment in his lap for a long time. The ward was quiet. Madame Pomfrey moved softly somewhere at the far end. Outside, the castle was doing its nighttime things, the subsonic hum, the ghost traffic, the old plumbing running in its old pipes. He picked up the parchment and unfolded it. James Potter's handwriting was nothing like his. It was loose and slightly rushed, the handwriting of someone whose thoughts moved faster than his pen, looping and energetic and occasionally running off the line. He read it the way he read everything, quickly, completely, and then he sat still for a while. He would not record what it said. Some things didn't go in files. He folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his robe, next to Natasha's letter. The last 2 weeks of term moved at a different pace than the rest of the year, the specific velocity of something winding down, examinations and warm weather and the great hall having a quality in the evenings of a place that was being memorized by the people inside it. Harry moved through it with the particular attention of someone who had stopped cataloging their environment as threats and variables and was now cataloging it as something else. Something he wanted to remember. He took his end-of-year examinations with the composed thoroughness of someone who had been preparing since before the curriculum began. Transfiguration was McGonagall's practical examination, which she proctored with the personal attention of someone who had a specific interest in one student's results and was professionally preventing herself from showing it. Harry completed the practical in 11 minutes. She said nothing. She wrote something in her notes with the compressed expressiveness of someone who kept their feelings in their handwriting. He got O's across everything except History of Magic, which was an E, because Binz's examination format rewarded rote recall and Harry's notes from that class were organized by analytical significance rather than date, and Potions, where he got an O and a separate note from Snape that said only, passable. Which Hermione, reading over his shoulder, translated as, this is the highest praise he is capable of giving. Ron got E's in everything except Charms, where Flitwick gave him an O with a footnote about natural instinct, and History of Magic, where he was in the same position as Harry for opposite reasons. He'd retained the dates and none of the analysis, which produced a different kind of imbalance but the same result. Hermione got O's in everything, including History of Magic, because she had read Binza's previous 16 examinations from the library archive and had written a practice paper calibrated to his specific evaluative preferences, which Harry found both admirable and completely Hermione. "You reverse-engineered the examiner," he said. "It's just pattern analysis," she said. "That's what I do," he said. "I know," she said, with the composure of someone who had accepted the commonality and found it pleasing. Ron looked between them and said, "The two of you are going to be absolutely insufferable forever," with the warm resignation of someone who had decided this was his life and was fine with it. "Almost certainly," Harry said. "Definitely," Hermione said. Natasha taught Muggle studies for the last 2 weeks of term. The class was technically an elective attended by third years and above, but she had renegotiated the arrangement with McGonagall, who had apparently agreed to whatever was proposed, which Harry suspected had more to do with the 90-minute conversation than with the curriculum, and the result was that she was in the castle, visible, present in the corridors and at the staff table and occasionally in the library, and the castle absorbed her with the same completeness with which it absorbed everything and everyone that belonged there. Harry watched his mother navigate Hogwarts. He watched her read the room the way she always read rooms, the quick, systematic sweep, the baseline established and updated, the specific attention distributed through apparent inattention. He watched her interact with the other staff members, with the particular calibrated warmth of someone who liked people in principle while remaining comprehensively aware of them in practice. He watched Flitwick talk to her with great enthusiasm about a variation on a levitation charm and watched her listen with genuine interest, and he watched McGonagall and Natasha exist in the same corridor with the ease of people who had already had every relevant conversation and now simply occupied shared space. He watched her watch him. Not constantly, she was too good for constantly. But with the peripheral awareness that was her version of the arm hanging off the bed, the unconscious continuous proximity that was her vocabulary for, "You are located, you are known, you are here." On the second Thursday she was there, she sat at the staff table at breakfast and looked at Harry across the great hall with the expression he'd seen in the mirror. Not laughing, but carrying the possibility of it, the looseness that preceded it, the being okay enough that made laughing possible. He looked back. He felt the full warmth of it without containing any of it. She looked away first. He went back to his eggs. Ron said, without looking up from his toast, "Your mum is very cool." "She's terrifying," Harry said. "Cool and terrifying aren't mutually exclusive," Hermione said. "In fact, in my observation, they frequently co-occur." "That's a very sophisticated way of saying she's cool," Ron said. "I don't say things unsophisticated ways." "I know, it's alarming." "Thank you." Harry listened to them argue the taxonomy of coolness and ate his eggs and felt the day arrange itself around him with the particular quality of ordinary life, which was not simple and was not uncomplicated and was not safe in the operational sense, but which had a texture that he was learning to move through without running a continuous threat assessment, and which was therefore something he had not had before and which he was now, carefully and with full attention, choosing to have. The leaving feast was on a Thursday evening, torches and banners and the 4 house tables full of students at the level of collective energy that preceded a long summer. The house cup went to Gryffindor, which produced the response you'd expect from the Gryffindor table. Fred and George created a small explosion that Dumbledore acknowledged with benign tolerance, and Harry watched the hall and thought about September and everything that had been built since September. He looked at the staff table. Quirrell's seat was empty. It had been empty since May, since the morning after the chamber, when the official story had been managed through Dumbledore's office in a way that Harry hadn't been consulted on but that had produced a narrative involving a dangerous magical creature in the dungeons and a resigned professor and no mention of philosopher's stones or dark lords inhabiting the backs of heads. The management of narrative, Harry thought, was one of the things he was going to have the second part of the conversation with Dumbledore about. He thought about Quirrell in the hospital somewhere. He thought about the man who had been afraid from the start and who had done terrible things from inside the fear and who was now, if Madame Pomfrey's careful non-answer was to be analyzed properly, alive and in a state that might permit, eventually, the kind of reckoning that people needed when the thing that had been using them was gone. He thought about choice. About the ways people got into things and the ways they didn't. He thought about himself in a different set of circumstances, earlier, more vulnerable, less Natasha, less specific, and about the distance between that hypothetical and what was actually sitting at the Gryffindor table tonight, which was not easily measured but which had a shape and a weight that he was aware of. "All right?" Ron said, beside him, the automatic check-in of someone who had started doing this somewhere around November and hadn't stopped. "Yes," Harry said. And then, thinking. "About what?" "Choices," Harry said. "Who makes them? When?" He picked up his pumpkin juice. The ways things could have gone differently. Ron considered this with the easy seriousness he brought to things that deserved it. Could have gone worse. Significantly. But it didn't. No. Harry looked at the hall, the 4 tables, the floating candles, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear summer night, the ghosts moving through the walls at the edges, the staff table with its assembled peculiarities. The school. His school. It didn't. Ron picked up his own drink. "Good," he said, simply, with the specific Ron quality of things said simply that meant something complete. "Then that's what counts." Harry thought about this. Thought about whether it was operationally sound, whether the sufficientness of a good outcome made the analysis of the near misses less important, whether, he stopped thinking about it. He drank his pumpkin juice. He listened to Fred tell a story about something that had happened in March that apparently involved an enchanted ceiling, for Ravenclaws, and a misunderstanding about the nature of anti-gravity charms, and he laughed in the real way, the full way, the way that the mirror had shown him. The morning of departure, Harry found Draco Malfoy at the top of the main staircase. Not by design, he was coming down from the dormitory with his trunk and Draco was coming from the direction of the Slytherin wing with his, and they arrived at the top of the stairs with the timing of 2 people who had been circling each other at a specific radius for an entire year and had finally, on the last morning, been placed in actual proximity. They looked at each other. Draco's expression had the quality that Harry had been watching develop since October. The original social status assessment phase had been slowly, incrementally replaced by something more complicated. Not friendlier exactly. More real. More like the face of someone who had been told repeatedly what to think and had been quietly not quite thinking it. "You stopped the stone from being stolen," Draco said. "Not asking." Statement. "Where did you hear that?" Harry said. "I'm observant." Draco picked up his trunk. The official story is obvious nonsense to anyone who was paying attention. He looked at Harry with the direct challenge that was his version of honesty. "I was paying attention." "I noticed," Harry said. A pause. The staircase was quiet, early, most students still at breakfast or packing. "You're different from what I expected," Draco said. The sentence had cost him something, he could see it in the slight stiffness of the delivery, the words of someone who had been raised to not give ground. What everyone said Potter would be. "You're not," he stopped. Collected himself. "You're not what the story says." "The story's incomplete," Harry said. Clearly. Draco looked at his trunk handle. "My father has opinions about your family." "I know," Harry said. "His opinions are frequently wrong," Draco said, and this one cost him more, the flat delivery of it, the way it landed without effect, the specific tone of someone stating a conclusion that has been arrived at through actual thought rather than received from somewhere else. "Not always. But frequently." Harry looked at him for a moment. He thought about the behavioral profile he'd been building since Charms in September, status assessment, rivalry, obsession with understanding what he couldn't categorize, the slow background process of a person whose context had been curated for him beginning to do his own editing. He thought about Natasha saying no generic villains and then thought about the fact that Natasha hadn't said that, that was his own synthesis of what she'd spent 11 years modeling. "Second year," Harry said. "If you actually want to understand something rather than be briefed on it, I'm not hard to find." Draco looked at him with the specific expression of someone who hadn't expected that. "Then, you're extending an offer to a Slytherin." I'm extending an offer to someone who's been paying attention all year and is starting to ask the right questions. Harry picked up his trunk. Those are different categories. A beat. They might be the same person, Draco said, which was as close to agreement as his entire vocabulary of posture and expression allowed. They might, Harry said, and went down the stairs. The train ride back to London was different from the train ride to Hogwarts in the ways that endings were different from beginnings, not opposite, but turned around, the same landscape going past in the other direction, the same compartment occupied by the same people with 9 months between their first meeting and this one. Ron was playing chess against himself. Hermione had 3 books open and was reading all 3 in rotation, which was a thing she did that Harry had stopped finding strange sometime around February. Vdova was asleep in her cage with the complete commitment of a bird who had delivered many important letters and had earned her rest. Outside the windows, Scotland was giving way to England, the hills lowering and the light changing and the particular quality of the north receding behind them. Harry sat with his back against the window and his knees up and watched his friends. The word was easy now, had been easy for months, the resistance to it dissolved so gradually that he couldn't identify when it had finished dissolving, and let the journey be what it was. Ron said, without looking up from the board, "What do you reckon next year's like?" "Different," Harry said. "Better or worse than this year?" Harry thought about the stone and Quirrell and the mirror and the chess room and the troll and Snape's passable and McGonagall's ginger newts and the flying and the chess games and the pancakes on Thursday mornings that weren't Tuesdays and the letters in Russian with the single operational lines and the single personal ones that were never long enough and always enough. "Different," he said again. Hermione looked up from the middle book. "There's a new defense against the dark arts teacher," she said. "I looked it up. The ministry has a list of approved candidates." She paused. "I also found references to a diary that apparently belonged to someone called T.M. Riddle, which is interesting given everything we know about the name." Ron's pen stopped. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Harry. "The summer hasn't even started." "Research doesn't stop for summer," Hermione said. "Most things stop for summer." "Most things aren't as important," she said, with the composure of someone who genuinely believed this, which was, Harry thought, one of the most Hermione things she had ever said. "She's right," Harry said. Ron looked at the ceiling. "Next year is going to be complicated, isn't it?" "Probably," Harry said. "Are we doing it anyway?" Harry looked at both of them, Hermione already back in the middle book but with her ear turned toward the conversation, the way she listened while reading, Ron watching him with the guileless directness of someone who already knew the answer and just wanted to hear it said. "Together," Harry said. Ron turned back to the chessboard. "Obviously." King's Cross was cold and grey and full of the specific energy of families reuniting, the platform disgorging Hogwarts students into the mundane roar of the station, trunks and owls and the gradual reassimilation into the world that had no floating candles or enchanted ceilings or 3-headed dogs. Harry came through the barrier and stopped, and let the noise of the station land around him. Natasha was at the edge of the crowd. She was in black, which was always true. She had her hands in her pockets, which meant she wasn't expecting any situation. She was watching him come through the barrier with the full attention she gave things she cared about, which she carried with no performance either way. It was simply there, readable if you knew her, invisible if you didn't. He walked toward her. He stopped when he reached her. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. She reached out and adjusted his collar, which was fine. He let her. She dropped her hands back into her pockets. "Taller," she said. "You said that at Christmas. You're still doing it." "Puberty is apparently a continuous process," he said. She almost smiled. "How are your hands?" He held them up. "Healed. Clean, no scarring. Pomfrey's potions had done what she'd said they'd do." "Good. Good." She looked at the crowd around them, Ron reuniting with the red-haired wall of his family with the particular chaotic warmth of large families whose love expressed itself at volume, Hermione being hugged by parents who looked like her in the specific ways that made heredity suddenly legible, students streaming past in all directions. How was the train? Hermione is already researching next year. Of course she is. Natasha watched the Weasley family with an expression that was the kind of neutral that contained warmth underneath. She's extraordinary. She's terrifying, Harry said. Cool and terrifying aren't mutually exclusive, Natasha said, which was apparently the conclusion multiple people had reached independently about Hermione Granger, and which Harry found deeply fitting. They stood together in the noise of King's Cross for a moment. The crowd moved around them and through them, and the station was loud and ordinary and enormous, and above it all the glass roof let in the grey London light that was different from the Scottish light and different from the light in the Great Hall, but was, in its particular way, also his. The diary, Harry said. T.M. Riddle. Hermione found references. Natasha was quiet for 3 seconds, which was 3 seconds of full analysis. I'll brief you before September. I want to know everything this time. You'll know everything I know, she said. Which I should be telling you is operational protocol and not a concession. Is it? It's both, she said. The concession came first. He looked at her. He thought about the pancakes on Thursday mornings that weren't Tuesdays, and the chess set mid-played on the table, and the 2 coffee mugs by the kettle, slightly different sizes, and the photograph on the mantelpiece where both of them were looking at the camera with the same expression. He thought about his father's letter in his inner pocket. He thought about what it had said. He thought about what it meant to be the child of 2 people, one gone, one here, both of them having given him everything they had to give, in their own completely different ways, and the combination of those 2 things being precisely what was standing here in King's Cross Station at the end of a year that had changed everything and nothing and everything again. He thought, I know what I am. And I'm still deciding what I'm going to be. And those are different things, and the second one is mine. Ready? Natasha said. He picked up his trunk. Vdova's cage. The go bag that had been packed since the morning. Yes, he said. They walked out of the station together into the grey London afternoon, the river somewhere ahead of them, the flat on Waterloo Bridge, the chess set waiting, the books on the shelves, the particular quality of a space that 2 people had built over 11 years without ever using the word home, but which was, in every way that mattered, exactly that. Behind him, the station noise faded. Ahead, London went on the way London always went on, enormous, complicated, indifferent to the specific, and full of everything that came next. Harry Romanoff Potter, 11 years old, trained operative, son of James Potter and Natasha Romanoff, first-year Gryffindor, seeker, sometime chess player, person in progress, walked forward. He did not look back. He already knew what was there.